Today, we're going to talk about podcasting, everything podcasting. I often get asked, how do you start a podcast? What kind of equipment do you need in order to record a podcast? How do you edit it? How do you produce it? So that's what we're going to talk about. Why to podcast, types of podcasts, how to conduct a podcast, the gear that I use and what I've found useful, how I edit it, publish it, promote it, legal and ethical considerations, lessons I've learned over the years. I've been doing this for about 5 years now. I've got about over 130 episodes that I've done myself, and then a number of others with other podcasts that I've helped out with. And then we've got some questions from the listeners. I was fortunate that I was contacted by an individual here in Italy right now, I believe, Stuart Godwin. Stuart, welcome on board.
Thank you very much. I am. It's actually sunny Sardinia, so just a little bit east, but still part of Italy. So it's a beautiful place.
I'm going to have to get my butt over there sometime. It looks beautiful. I Googled images after we talked last time. I was looking at it. It looks fantastic.
The beaches are completely ridiculous. And actually, there's several laws on the island. They had so many tourists showing up taking sand from the beaches. It's now against the law.
What?
Yeah.
You know, it's beautiful when people are coming in and removing your sand.
Exactly.
So, Stuart, you came in, you said, hey, I've got some questions. Somehow that floated into the back of one of my inboxes and almost got lost. Office forwarded over to me, and I said, tell you what, I get asked this question often enough. If you're game, why don't we try and make a course out of this? And we'll do this casually and conversationally, and I will try and dump as much information that I've learned over the years in ways that successes I've had, failures I've had, and you're good enough to type up just a ton of questions, really, really good questions. Like these are things that I've been asked by other people time and time again, and then some really unique ones, which I've never actually been asked before. So without further ado, let's get into this one.
Go for it.
Okay, why to podcast? Well, why don't I ask you, since you're the fellow wanting to get into a podcast, why do you want a podcast?
Well, primarily due to the line of work that I'm in. We are government contracting consultants, and it's a rather small niche. And our main client base are those small to medium-sized contractors who want to be medium to large-sized contractors. And that's, a $50 to a $250 million organization. And that is not the kind of client that responds well to, hey, download my free 10-point checklist on how not to write proposals. So we thought, okay, we need to get value out to the client and to the public. And this was a natural way of saying, a good way of doing that, presenting the information and not being, like I said, not being some sort of freebie that you just download.
You know, a fellow friend of mine went to school with them. I went to a number of different high schools. This was my second or third to last high school. I got in a little bit of trouble and moved around a bit here, but he ended up writing a book called Sociable in the early days of social media. And it was funny. I call him up. I'm like, what do you mean you wrote a book? I didn't know you're the book writing type. He says, all I did was I talked into a tape recorder with a friend of mine, and we sent it over to India. We had it transcribed. We sent it over some other place. They printed the book up. He said, now I got a book and I'm on the speaking tour. And it's Stephen Jagger who did that one. And it was interesting because he was able to click right at the beginning about how to provide information through different platforms in social media, and podcasting is just another platform that you can provide information. And I asked him at one time, I said, aren't you afraid, like you're out here giving all your secrets and all your tips and all your tricks. Aren't you afraid of giving away all of this stuff and reducing any value that somebody might find in you? Like you're just giving it all away. And he says, no, that thinking is absolutely backwards. Give it all away. People will come to you because you are the expert. So I've been on podcasts before with subject matter experts who are so tight-lipped and guarded that there's just no value in the episode that goes across, and it consequently, it never gets aired. So you're on the right track already.
Good. And that's where we're coming from. Again, what we do, a lot of folks, have this mystical image, that it's some rare and deep guarded secret, and it's not. It's read instructions, follow directions, but there is nuance to it. There is skill to it, and we can tell you exactly how to do it, what to do. We've been doing it for 25 years, so I would wager we're a bit faster, a bit more efficient, and we can tell your story. A lot of people can't get out of their own way trying to answer how they're going to drive, Uncle Sam's whatever from Erbil to Syria, enough to say you need to tell your story in that, and you need to tell the government why you're the guy to do it, and because everybody else is saying, yeah, I'm doing that. So
yeah.
And we think that the podcasting is a good way to get that message out, and like you said, to project the experience, and 25 years and 14.9 billion. We kind of know what we're doing.
Well, I'm really stoked for you. Have you done podcasting before? Have you been on other podcasts, or is this your first one?
This is the first one. 1,000 years ago, when I was in school, I was a radio DJ on KAFA 104.5 out of Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And Tuesday was Tuesday. So yeah, exactly.
So you got some background in speaking in front of a microphone, which is good.
Yeah. And one of the things we always had trouble doing, it was a cadet run. I went to the Air Force Academy. So, being a DJ was a privilege, if you will. And, not everybody always had the time and whatnot. And so but we needed to be on air. And so it was always urgent to get folks to record. So we had pre-recorded things. And anytime I had a free minute, I was down in the studio, and kid you not, 20 years later, listening to the live stream, and there's me doing a weather report that is so nondescript. It could be for any day of the week, for any month of the year. And it was a 20-year-old recording. Like, guys, I gotta update them, man.
Now you can recycle it.
Yeah,
it's evergreen. So the other thing that you kind of touched on there, you're a subject matter expert in what you do. People who get in to do a podcast, some of them will be coming from the same background. They're going to, the same aspirations. They'll be a subject matter expert in what they do. And people say, well, can't you just find this stuff on the internet? Can't you just look on YouTube and find all of this? Totally you can. 100% you can. Everything that I'm going to say here is somehow going to be on the internet in one shape or another, but people will come to you because you are an information concierge, essentially. Yeah. I think that's why influencers are a thing. There's so much information out there that they say, hey, I like this person's style, or I like what they're doing, or I like their ambitions. I'm going to follow them for a bit, and so I can absorb the information I can fast, readily, easily. And that's why they're going to come to your podcast, because you're an information concierge for what you do, and nobody else can do what you do.
That's exactly why you and I got connected. I was, running through YouTube. I was online. I was looking for something. I found a podcast about that something that you had done. And and it was good information. And I learned what I needed to learn. But while I was there, like I said, I was impressed by the rest of the podcast. I'm looking for a different word, but everything else, the production behind it, and that's what prompted me to reach out and say, "How do you do that?" Because I'd like to do that.
Oh, I love it. You say, well, I don't want to copy exactly what you have there because that's your thing. And I said, copy away. I don't own the colors. I don't own by all means, copy. There's two types of people as well that you'll see when it comes to copying. And this might be a little bit of a tangent, but this is why we're doing this in this way, so we can dump out the information. There are those who will look at something that they really like, and they're like, I want to see the positives that I can pull out of that in a way that it can bolster myself to be a better person, so I can then deliver a better product to others. And then there are the other ones who will want to tear down the other buildings around them so that their building looks the highest.
Yeah.
And when you approached me right away, I got a sense of the type of person you are. And I'm like, 100%. I love helping people out in their endeavors, new businesses, if they're entrepreneurs, if it's podcasting, whatever it might be. I love sharing my passion for what I do with other people because I get a lot out of that. It sparks that in me. And so I try to bring that into every podcast I do as well.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate it. And yeah, it came across in just that one episode. So,
well, I've got a couple of notes here on the Why to Podcast. I can go through them quickly. I look at this and I say, identify your niche and what you want to talk about. So if somebody's looking at getting into podcasting, what's their niche? There's currently over 5 million podcasts out there in the world. Yeah. And people are like, well, I'm just going to be a voice out in the wilderness. Well, maybe not. No one's going to have your voice. No one's going to have your background. And that distinct you-ness is a thing that I think anybody listening to this who wants to get into a podcast really needs to learn to double down on. It's not so much being the subject matter expert and having all of the right answers. It's being able to also have you come out in the podcast. Because you can go to AI and you can get a lot of answers, but you're not going to get that you part of it.
Exactly. And that was one of the things that you and I had talked about previously too. Since we're banging away on the keyboard all day long and we're storyboarding, and I can go on forever. And at dinner parties, they're like, okay, look, you've talked enough. You need to let other people speak for a little while. And so, but that could serve me well in this venue.
I think when people look at this, sometimes they say, hey, I like listening to podcasts, or I hear podcasts are popular. I want to start a podcast. And I think they really should, if you're going to approach it sort of with a system in place, sort of a business plan or a business model. And like any business plan, the second the rubber hits the road, it goes out the window and you're constantly rewriting. But at least you have some sort of a North Star or a direction that's getting you going. And I think people should approach it like that. So identify the reason why you feel podcasting is the right direction, because maybe strictly audio is your ticket, audio and video. And we're going to talk about this, strictly YouTube or video. Maybe shorts on social media is a better way to get it out, or maybe they're really good at writing and they want to get on, Scribed or any of these different platforms where they can get their articles put out. I think a person should look at what it is that they're passionate about first and work towards that. Because if you're really passionate about writing and you really don't like the way your voice sounds and you're self-conscious about it all the time, like you're going to have an uphill battle to fight if you're choosing podcasting as your main modus operandi.
Yeah.
And in that business planning, I'd say, what does podcasting success look like to you? Yeah. Whether that's more business, whether that's followers, whether that's certain metrics that you're going to be able to track, bringing positivity, using it as a platform to talk to other people, making social connections. Like, I would really look hard at what it looks like in a success situation. Does it mean you have to make X amount of money from your podcast? Because I'll tell you this, most podcasts don't make money. Because people don't start with that as their one of their goals, and we can get into that monetization and the rest. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But so, what does success look like for you? What does the why look like for you? Have a big North Star in your why, because that's going to make everything so much more simple as you start recording your episodes. Yeah. Does this align with my why? Somebody approached me and they want to talk to me about A, B, and C, and they're super interesting, and I think they're a great person, but it doesn't align with my why at all. It maybe I look at a spin-off podcast, or maybe I just tell them, sorry, I'm going to put my time into the things that actually work towards my why. Okay. So taking a look at what success looks like for you. Of course, Earl Nightingale's definition of success is a progressive realization of a worthy ideal. So take a look at what a worthy ideal for you is. Are you progressively realizing it? And if all of a sudden you're not, comes up the next point, which is, When do you stop? And what does an exit strategy look like for you? Because if things aren't lining up for you, what would be the indicators that you either need to change course, recalibrate, or choose a more desirable course of action?
Okay.
These are things that I would look at even before starting, and I'll tell you why in a moment. And, you can take a look at creating a bit of an assessment list. In that way, you can quickly approve or deny to determine which episode should or should not be on your podcast, or how you prioritize releases or recordings. And if you have that quick checklist, yes, they meet. For me, are they positive, right? Are they going to bring value to the listeners? Can I bring value to the guest? These are all part of my checklist that I go through. If I can't answer yes to those, I got to question why I'm actually recording it. So that's a little bit what I have written down on my why of the podcasting. Do you have any thoughts on the why, or did it spark any questions?
No, absolutely. I think, again, if you're going to put yourself out in public, and that's what this is, you need to have something that you feel compelled to say that you also feel is valuable to somebody else. And otherwise, you're just recording yourself in the shower, and everybody sings well in the shower. You know what I mean? And so,
have you seen the Saturday Night Live skit? I think it's called "White Guys Podcasting." If people Google it, and it's just a bunch of bros in the basement, and they're out there podcasting and sharing their opinion, and the wives are getting upset, and so they get this Fisher-Price podcast set, and so they're not actually broadcasting their every little thought out to the world. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. I haven't seen that, man.
I
do. I agree. I think it's important to have something, and you're right. If you've got a strong why, if you've got, and that why is what's driving your success, then it helps wrangle everything else. It helps provide, boundaries, like you said. Is this the right episode? Is this the right guest? Is this the right topic? Yeah, I think all of those things go together well.
And it also drives later on, if we talk about monetization, it drives the monetization. Because if you make money your end goal and you're chasing after the dollar, you're always going to be chasing after the dollar. This as an entrepreneur. If you make being the best at what you do and your customer satisfaction your end goal, the money's going to come.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day too. And that's one of the driving reasons we got into this was, to help others succeed at what we do. And I hadn't even thought about the thing being monetized. Dear God, that was literally the last thing in my mind at this moment. But yeah, obviously, I mean, that's one of our key metrics that we throw up on the wall every year is, billions of dollars of customer awards. It's not the money that we make, it's the money that we make for everybody else.
So this goes into the next one. What kind of a podcast are you thinking about? I mean, we've got a number of different types, but I'm curious what you envision as a format.
What I think this is an ideal format. Just a small one-on-one interview kind of conversation, where there's a rough framework, and hey, these are the kind of things that we want to talk about, and we're going to start here and kind of end there. And for our line of work, okay, hey, we want to break down the RFP today. Tomorrow we want to tell you how to handle negotiations post-award. Talk to a contracting officer. Talk to a corporate business development officer in a Boeing-esque company, Lockheed, the mom and pops, the folks that are just starting in the government contracting world. They're not going to be those billion-dollar organizations, but there's a lot they can learn from, and a lot that we can share. And so that was where we're going with it. That was at least my vision, my idea. Like you said, as soon as we plug in the mic and start recording, who knows where it'll go.
Well, it's one of these things. It's nice to have an idea of where you're going, but in the same breath to not get yourself pigeonholed If all of a sudden you have an idea of a different way that might work better, it's okay. This platform allows you so much latitude to be able to just experiment. And the litmus test will be the audience. They're going to come back and say you're bringing value, or they're going to show they're not bringing value by just not listening, right? But a few different types of podcasts. Some of these I've been a part of, some I haven't. But a basic interview style podcast, which would be kind of like what we're doing right now, where you ask questions. When I do the interview ones, I always encourage people. I say, I could just sit here and ask you questions, but by all means, throw them back at me, right? Ask me questions too, because it makes it into a conversation and it makes it way more dynamic. And some people have a difficult time with that. And we can talk about interviewing techniques, but this interview format that we're doing, one-on-one, I found brings me the most value, better connection with the individual, and I think that value relays over to the individual I'm talking with as well as the audience. So I'm on board with you if that's the road you're looking at. Panel-style podcasts, and I've done those, and you can lose some in a panel style. I've done a couple of live events, and I mean, there's a lot of tongue biting in a panel style. There's a lot of things you wish you could say that you just can't because time constraints, and you got to let other people talk as well. And there's a solo one. I haven't done that yet, but I'm going to give it a shot where you just talk into the microphone and share.
And there's a lot of content that we could disperse that way. That it's just me and a slide. And oh, look, this is something neat. This is something. Yeah, and I don't know. It's an option. I think it's less dynamic in just the perspective of a viewer, if you will, which is all I am right now. That I personally, I get more out of this. Yeah, the back and forth than because otherwise I could just send me your slides. I can read them.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I definitely get more out of this. I haven't done the solo podcasting. It's something I've been thinking about for very short sort of snippets. If I want to be able to control the information coming out and present it in a certain way, that's where I see the solo being very beneficial. And being able to use that to then create micro content for other social media platforms in a way that's going to be completely controlled in a studio environment. So I can see there being a benefit to that, and then using that solo content to reach out to others who might have differing opinions, who might share the same opinion but be able to add on to it. Use that solo content to be able to attract other interviews is one of the thoughts that I was.
Point. Yeah, I could see that being a way to, like you said, draw in. Not to gosh, what's the word? There's a social media word for it where you purposely say things that make people angry.
That's right.
Yeah.
Clickbaiting them or
clickbaiting. Yeah. Hate baiting. That's what it is.
Hate baiting. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So, which sounds, I don't know, a little egregious, but still, yeah. Hey, anybody can win a government proposal. Prove me wrong.
Honestly, and we'll talk about ethics near the end here, but the Guinness Book of World Records. People know about it. They've heard about it. Do you know how it came about?
No idea.
So Guinness Beer Company says, we want people sitting in pubs longer, and how can we keep them warm in the seats and drinking beer? Well, they like football, right? Soccer. They like watching this, and they seem to like trivia. Maybe we'll make a trivia book. So they had a fellow tasked with gathering all of these different statistics, fastest runners, highest jumper, whatever it might be. And then the person had to go and fact check all of these things. And he'd go around to all the other people in the running community and just say, yeah, we're confirming that the fastest runner was. And it was apparently incredibly difficult for this guy to be able to get other people to volunteer their time to help him out and give the correct information. So he says, tell you what, I'm just going to make it up. I'm going to say this person's the fastest runner. So he completely made it up. And he said people were just chomping at the bit to correct him. Experts from all over the world are coming in and saying, no, that's wrong on this date at this time. And I've got pictures. So, you know, maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing. And it's human nature for people to look at an error, an indiscrepancy. We are naturally biased to looking at something that's going to stand out as wrong. So maybe we just leverage that human nature in an ethical way.
Yeah. I had no idea he just made it up. That's awesome.
It's kind of funny, eh?
Yeah.
So solo podcasting, storytelling. I think if you're going to have a compelling podcast, having a degree of storytelling is going to be important. If it's strictly data-driven, yes, that will appeal to certain people who are looking at data to be disseminated in a fast way or in a certain way. But humans are a storied creature. So if we have data that we can disseminate and incorporate a story into there, now you've got their attention. Now they're going to remember it. So I think the storytelling aspect is important.
Yeah,
of course.
I couldn't agree with that more. It's fundamental to our business. It is again telling the client's story to the government, to explain to the government how our client is going to solve the government's problem. At the end of the day, that's the people that are reviewing all of these documents, these proposals. Yeah, they do have a degree of subject matter expertise, but they are beholden to a guy in the field, a soldier, an airman, a sailor who actually has a problem. And the government is going to spend money to fix that problem. And that's what they're looking for. But you got to be able to tell the story. So yeah, I anytime I don't care if you're just hanging out with your friends. You got to tell the story. Yeah, if you, hey, I met this pretty girl the other day. No. You got to tell the story about how they got there. Yeah.
100%. And I admire a good storyteller. And I will sit and I'll listen and I take mental notes. And I'm like, wow, the way that they're verbal, they're nonverbal, they're paraverbal, how their tone, pitch, intonation, how they move. I mean. And I'll take notes and I'll say, now, are there things that would be natural to me that I can incorporate to assist in telling that story? And I think if people have that in the back of their mind, then they'll always be watching for it. Not only just admiring the good storyteller, but now how can they be a better storyteller themselves? We've got live podcasts. Now those, I've done a few of those. And man, my heart was thumping the first time I did one of those because I'm like, I better not say anything wrong. Like when I do these ones, I can edit it afterwards. I can do whatever I want, right?
Yeah, I bit my tongue a couple of times. Like, no, okay, can't say that. I'm like, oh no, we're not live. It's cool. I can say whatever the hell I want to.
That's funny. Yeah. A limited series. Maybe look at it and say, tell you what, I'm willing to put X amount of time towards this, and you'd want to do a quick limited series. And say, here's a certain topic. I'm going to do 5 on that topic. Then I'll do 5 on another topic. We got roundtable discussions, which is sort of different theme or different topic, same kind of people all the time. A little different than the panel, similar but different. News, current affairs, and then you have the hybrid ones that kind of mix it up.
Well, talk to me a little bit about what's the difference between the panel and the roundtable, because I'm fuzzy there, man.
Yeah, panel can differ, I think, is technically how they mention it, whereas roundtable, it's like you, me, a couple other people. We're the constants on here. We just have what's our topic we're going to talk about today? Okay. And they'll throw a topic out. Friend of mine, Canadian Special Forces, JTF2, went to his house, recorded a podcast, and I'm like, man, you should have your own podcast, right? And actually, this is the first time I met him prior to having a friendship with him. And so he started asking me, picking my brain a little bit. And sure enough, he's got a podcast now, and he's set it up with another fellow, and it's called The Collective. I've been the guest on The Collective a number of times. Nice. And they get hard charging, high flying men and women from all over the world coming in. It's all about positivity and better embetterment and emotional, physical, mental well-being, and from a special forces sort of background or elite operators background. And I love it. I love the podcast, but it's different from the interview style. And it's, again, okay, we've got a topic or a discussion, and maybe the topic is, I don't know, difficult tasks, something really broad and nebulous, right? Wow. And your approach is going to be completely different than my approach, and we're going to come in and then we're going to just talk about it. So I think it's harder to decipher the value out of something like that, but it creates a greater possibility for a unique thought to come in, which could be valuable.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
No, I'm following. Yeah, and I can see where you get to that conclusion that, because everybody's talking, everybody's kind of throwing ideas off of each other, and there's some guy in the corner who's going on about how hard it is to French a rack of lamb, and it's not what we're talking about, dude. But yes, gotcha. But at the end of the day, somebody might come across that and go, "Wow, I didn't know that about Frenching a rack of lamb. That's interesting."
Yeah, and maybe that's going to be the one clip that gets everyone to listen to it now, and that's the one that takes off on social media. And so I've really learned to have an open mind and not be like, "What are you talking about, rack loud? We're talking about this over here." Having that open mind, because it's crazy. Some of the silliest things that pop off in the public's interest that I never thought would, I just let it roll now, because if one person's thinking about it, maybe somebody else is, and all of a sudden this whole different demographic is now listening to your podcast because somebody talked about something completely different that you weren't even thinking about.
Wow. Does that happen a lot?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, all the time. And I'm going to talk about that in the interviewing style and what I've learned over the years and how I've adapted. And you ask me again in a couple of years, I might have a different answer, but it's an iterative process, and I'm always learning.
Okay. Interesting.
So one thing that's interesting, here's a stat, and maybe I should have threw this out at the beginning. So we've got 5 million podcasts right now.
Yeah.
And I guess one stat that came up, I think it was 1.8 million podcasts tend to pop up every year and quit. 90% of the people don't get past episode 3.
Wow.
Episode 3, 90%. Of those 90% who make it past episode 3, another 90% quit after episode 20.
Wow.
So if you can get past 20 episodes with your podcast,
you're in the, 1%?
You're in the top percentage of all the podcasts in the world. And right now, there's a website called Listen Notes, and we'll talk about metrics in a bit, but podcast metrics are kind of atrocious. I think they're taking steps to make it better, but I think the Silvercore podcast is in the top 2% of all podcasts in the world right now.
Wow. Congrats.
Yeah, and some things that help a podcast to be higher or lower, and again, we'll talk about it because really the metrics don't mean a heck of a lot, would be the length of time that they've been on for, the reach, the exposure, the guests, but it all basically boils down to the content, right? If the content is something that people want to hear and are listening to, then they're going to pick it up.
Yeah.
It's like the actor is like, man, I'm just not getting any gigs, right? I'm going to find myself a better agent. Well, maybe be a better actor, right? And maybe the agents will be chomping at the bit to be there, right?
I mean, you read those numbers, but top 1%'s 20 podcasts. Okay, so great. I need to record 21, publish them on a drip, and there we go.
You got it.
Yeah.
And then it's out there, and then you're rolling. And once you start rolling, if you develop your why properly, it's true to your heart. It's something that you're passionate about. It's no longer work, right?
Yeah.
This is fun. And you're going out there and you're meeting some cool people. And this is what I love. I'm chatting with you. I'm getting your perspective. I'm got my proxy in Sardinia right now. I've been looking at the pictures and I could think about this a little bit. But it's fun and it doesn't feel like work to me. And I think that's the important part of looking at the why and looking at sort of planning it out at the early stages of kind of where you want to go with it.
Okay. That makes sense, man.
So I've got this section called How to Podcast, and I got how to interview, how to actively listen, how to elicit information, how to speak comfortably and confidently. But those are my quick notes. You've got a bunch, and it's under guests and interviews in your tab there. So if you've got your paper out,
Yep.
why don't we do this back and forth? So it's not just me chatting, and you can interrupt at any point. Start firing some questions away at me.
Okay, so I mean, the number one thing I had on the list was how do you identify, reach out, vet, and secure a guest? I have to imagine that there is a degree of flakiness. Some folks may never show up, may never respond, but how do you deal with that in I guess kind of a broad spectrum?
So my thoughts on that are, by and large, most people aren't flaky. Most people, when they commit to doing a podcast, they show up. Now, every once in a while, there can be an issue. There could be an emergency that comes up. There could be technical issues on a person's end. I do my best to do an in-person podcast whenever possible. I would have loved to have flown over to you and done one in your neck of the woods if the timings worked well. I've been saving up air miles for a while, and so it is one of the things that I'm looking at doing is doing more travel and incorporating the podcast to it. And I've got all the gear for that, which we'll talk about in a bit. But if I'm scheduling somebody for, let's say, a remote podcast like this one, where you're in one place, I'm in another, by and large, people show up. I did have an ex-Special Forces fellow, SBS, co-owner of a large company called TrueDark over in the UK. And just due to how the app that we're using, Riverside right now, it had a glitch in its scheduling. And so I'm trying to do it on his time. So I'm up at 2:00 in the morning and getting ready, and I'm driving over to my studio, and he's a no-show. And then the next day, we'll do it again the next day, he says. So I show up, I do it all over again. And this is where the glitch came in. And finally, we got a couple days later up at 2:00 doing this all over again, and showed up, had a fantastic podcast. That's the only real one to recent memory, and I get it. Part of it was glitch, part of it was just human factor. He's like, "Look, mate, I'm sorry. Totally on me. I scheduled myself wrong, right? I went back home. I'm sleeping. I'm getting messages coming in to say, I'm ready for the podcast now." Right? So, but no, by and large, people will show up. When I was in grade 10, I had a book report I had to do on a book called Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella. The book was later turned into a movie called Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner. Anyways, I didn't read the book, and I had to do this big old book report and report on the author. And I was able to find out where the author lived. Turned out he was living in Hope, which is not far from Vancouver and where I'm at, and tracked him down there. Then apparently he had recently moved and was in White Rock. So I called him up, grade 10. I phone him up, and I get an answering machine, says he's in Florida. All right, left a number in Florida. I phone him up in Florida. He's out on the beach. This woman, she's like, some kid trying to do a book report, right? And of course, all the public information on this guy, I think he was married and all the rest, and he's in Florida with his girlfriend. And, man. I guess the marriage was no longer. And so anyways, he gives me all of this information, which was completely different than anything that was publicly available. They're laughing. They're like, I don't know, some kid doing his book report, right? Teachers like giving me all these baseball references. You're not trying to fly one over in left field. Me, are you now? And no, honest. But that taught me a lesson, which was just ask. Yeah. And if there's somebody who is interesting, doesn't matter where they are on the socials, on Fortune's ladder, on the social structure. Instagram's pretty cool. I've DM'd people. I've gotten people through TikTok, right? In the early days, wow. I reached out. There's a guy, he did international child recovery and hostage rescuing.
Wow.
And he crowdsourced money, Operation Pegasus, I think was what it was called. And I was telling an interesting story about enlisting the Greek mafia, the Cypriot mafia in order to go, like just crazy kind of stuff that's going on. And I just reached out through TikTok. I said, your stories are insane. I'd love to showcase what you're doing. It seems positive. So
Wow.
that's how I tend to get it. In time, as your podcast gets bigger guests and been around a little bit longer, it gets easier.
Okay.
Authors, they want to publish their book. They want to get exposure of what it is, and they can tell a story. So
Yeah.
that's a place where it's easy to start. If there's authors in your industry, they tend to say yes.
No, that's hopeful. Like you said, if you ask, and to be real honest with you, I would say that I've generally had the same experience. If you need something from somebody, and it's not the secret sauce, that most people will lend a hand when they can.
Well, let's back up. You asked me, right?
Yeah,
but your
absolutely.
ask wasn't like, you didn't have your hand out and say, can you give me all the information, right? You said, I'm really curious. I have some specific questions. I'm willing to compensate you for your time. Now, I don't want a dime from you. I don't want anything. I think this is going to be more fun and bring more value. And you'll be surprised at how many people in the world are like-minded. If you approach them from a perspective of, I'm doing work. I'm not asking you to spoon feed this all to me.
Yeah.
People are receptive. They'll be there. So that's why this podcast is here, because you asked.
Well, thank you.
What's your next question?
The next question
go
I
on.
had on the list, I think we kind of maybe covered it, but maybe you could expand on it a little bit. But we talked about how your why is kind of the driving force. And so the question was originally, what criteria do you use to determine, if someone's a good fit for the show? Is it just why? I would imagine that sometimes there's a little bit of play, a little bit of, give or take off of the why that could be interesting. Let's see where it goes. Does that happen?
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes right off the bat, right? You're just like, oh, this person, they've done other shows. I've heard them talk. They can talk. They can tell a story. They match with what I'm looking for. The positive one is something that I look for. If somebody's got nothing but gripes and issues, there's a time and place for that, I guess, but I'd rather hear you say, I have concerns with A, B, and C, and here's some solutions that I have. Because I don't know, I got one life to live. Why do I want to spend my life complaining? And I don't want to be surrounding myself with other people who are going to be complaining. Now, that being said, negatively biased, you will get an audience. It's just not the audience I want to build around me. I purposely started the Silvercore podcast because I was experiencing a great deal of negativity in the industry that I was in. It's a low barrier to entry industry. There's a lot of let's tear down somebody's building to try and make our building bigger.
Really?
And I thought,
I would have thought your community was. I wouldn't have thought that of your community.
You wouldn't think it, but business is business, I guess, and you'll find it in any business. And in this community, when the barrier to entry is lower and the criteria for business aren't clearly defined, people's ambitions can get ahead of them, whether they know it or not, right? So it's one of these things that I've seen, and so I thought, how can I bring some positivity into an industry that I've been doing this since '94. I was in high school when I started doing sort of my business stuff, and And I've got ADHD. I got 101 other hobbies and interests. I like to surf and paraglide and rock climb, and there's so many different things. I love to be outdoors, and maybe I just look in a different direction. I thought, no, the people that I've seen who are the most successful in life are the ones who are able to navigate through the thick and the thin, and be able to carve a niche out for themselves in that one area and view those other things as hobbies and take their business and be able to mold that in a way that makes sense for them. So that's where the podcast came in for me. And it has repaid me, although I don't monetize the podcast, the value it has brought me personally as well as my business is immense. So, and we can talk more in monetization on that.
Well, honestly, when you say that, immediately sparked a question. So talk about that. The value that you personally get out of it. I think that might be important for people that are looking to get into podcasting.
Yeah. Well, I think so I teach classes. I never in a million years would I have thought that I would be a type of person who teaches. I run the business now more than I do the teaching. We've got a cadre of instructors and all the rest, but I'll approach podcasting in a similar way to how I teach a class. And that is, I'll leave my ego at the door and I'm looking at my class and how do I get them from point A to point B in the most effective way for them. And everyone's going to be different. So I find that as a challenge. There's a group of people, which I treat as one individual with a bunch of different types of personalities and questions. And I honestly care about every student that comes through. And I want to see the best for them. And I want them to succeed. And it's got nothing to do with me because my ego will be stroked under the fact that they're going to do well. And they're going to leave and they're going to tell other people. So I use that same sort of energy and analogy when I'm podcasting. I don't make the podcast about me. I do my very best, even though in this one I'm talking a lot, I do my very best to make the podcast about the guest. There is one caveat that I've noticed in there. I will have a different guest and some recurring guests, but a different guest basically every podcast. I'm the constant. So I should make sure that as much as I'm trying to leave my ego at the door, leave me behind, and make this about the person I'm talking to, I've realized I have to share and let some of me out because I am the constant that people will be coming back for.
Yeah. I mean, you're
even
the,
if
the
it's just
anchor.
right. That's right. And maybe they're not coming back for me, but they're coming back for my style of talking to a person or whatever it might be. So I think developing that why in the beginning helps develop that the you or the part of you that you wish to share with everybody else. Because there are some that will share absolutely everything. And maybe that's not for everybody. It's not for me. I'd have a hard time sharing absolutely everything. I'm naturally a very private person. But the more you get into it, the more you realize that we're all basically the same. We've all got the same sort of fears and likes and wants and aspirations. And it does make it easier to be able to relate with people and to let the you out. So what criteria is a good fit? Someone that fits with those things in your why.
Okay.
And what have I gotten out of it? I get this. Like if I leave a podcast, I'm riding a high afterwards. If it's a good podcast and I'm telling everyone about it, and that's the biggest thing that I get. On top of that, there's brand recognition. So the Silvercore podcast I run the Silvercore business. People can hear about it. We've got a club. We've got members all over the world that belong to the club. That's fantastic. They want to join the club. They help support the Silvercore podcast.
That is fantastic.
What's your next question?
So the next one I had, and this one, I now that we're 40 some odd minutes into this, I definitely see why you did it the way you did. But I got to tell you, a week ago when I was like, hey, I got your email. I checked your thing. Is there anything else? And no, it's fine. Yeah, it's good. I was looking for, I don't know what I was looking for, but I felt, when we were plugging things in today that I didn't feel prepared. And so, I do now appreciate the way that this is, it's a much more free-flowing conversation. But do you ever have to, do you get to a point where, okay, these are the things that we have to talk about. We've got an hour to talk about it. We got to hit A, B, and C. What do you do if you need to prepare somebody more thoroughly?
So different guests will require different things. And if there's certain subjects you want to talk about, I will put brackets around it and say, like, here's the no-go zone. Like if it's a politically heated topic that you're going to be alienating people and you've got a guest who has got a background that's just, right? They got some good stuff, but they've also got this other side. And so you might have to bracket it, right? I have learned that you might be very well known for a certain thing. You may have written books about it and done videos and movies, and like you're the expert in that. And so I'm like, I want to talk to you about that. And I get into the podcast only to realize that you've talked about that so many times you're bored of it and your current passion is something completely different. So my perspective is I try to be as dynamic as possible and I try to be able to flow. I will have a list of different things that I'd like to talk to the person about. I'll provide them a general idea of sort of why I'm approaching them and what I want to talk about. But I let their interest fuel the direction of the podcast because I'm interested in so many different things that I'm able to adapt, and that energy I find is something that is palpable that the audience would like because I've tried to turn a podcast into a podcast when it shouldn't have been, and I'm talking with a subject matter expert on it. So preparing a person would be, what are we talking about? I try not to talk too much of the person ahead of time about what we're going to talk about, just the generalities. Right. Because if you and I talk about that certain subject, it doesn't matter how good of an actor or a relayer the person can be. I find that they still have this thing in the back of their head. Oh, you already know the story, Trav. I told you the story. Yeah. And they kind of fast go through it. I want those details because the audience hasn't heard it yet. So if I talk ahead of time, inevitably those little details disappear. So I try not to talk about that.
Okay.
As for the technical stuff, I'll just send over, right now we're using Riverside. I'll send over Riverside's best practices tips. Just do a speed test, make sure you got enough bandwidth, right? The wired headset, and we can talk all about this stuff in gear. I give that one, but there's always going to be nerves from the people. Like I had this expert I was speaking with yesterday, and man, this guy's brilliant. And he trains elite soldiers essentially to be elite soldiers. Building the Elite is the book that he put together with someone else. Wow. It's a big, thick technical manual. And he was very concerned about, I just want to make sure, like, if you're going to be asking me about obscure studies, I got to make sure I brush up because it's been a while since I've looked at one study over the other study. I said, look, it's not that kind of podcast. I'm interested in you. If you bring up those studies, we'll talk about them. Otherwise,
I've got no citations over here that I'm throwing at you.
That's right. That's right. So that's typically how I try to prepare them. Put them at ease. Let them know we can edit this afterwards. If you tell a joke, I had one guy, he says, you know that joke I told halfway through? If my wife heard this, she'd kill me. Can you take it out? 100%. I'm not going to sandbag you. Just let me know before it goes to air. I can do whatever, right?
Nice.
Once it goes to air, okay, it's out there. So those are the simple things I do. Try and put them at ease, get some ground rules. I ask what's going to bring them the most value. I always ask how to pronounce their name because I've made mistakes, particularly with French names. But sorry, Catherine and Seb. Anyways,
we live around the world. We have folks in Asia Pacific. We have folks in South America. We have folks in throughout the GCC and MENA region, and I will have to rededicate myself to that because I've actually given up a little bit on pronouncing everybody's name correctly.
Oh, it's so important because it's going out into the ether in posterity. Yeah, exactly. And if you have their name wrong, it just feels disrespectful and it sets the tone wrong when you start. And so those are the things that I do to try and prepare a person. But by and large, having a little bit of nerves, I think, is good.
Okay.
And having too much, if it's scripted, it comes across as scripted. Yeah. People tune out. If a person sells something and it comes across as a sales pitch, people tune out. I tell them ahead of time, I said, look, if this is going to be a sales pitch, it'll never go to air, right? People will want to purchase your product or service based on the fact that they know you and they've got an idea of your background and they can relate to you, and not because you've told them how great all this stuff is. So those are my general parameters that I use for preparing someone.
Okay. Well, speaking of nerves, what do you do when, have you had a guest before that just froze that yes, no? Do you get that often? Do you get those? Yeah. How do you break somebody out of their shell when they're doing that?
So I've had those. Some of it you might have to edit afterwards. Some maybe they just don't go to they don't get aired. being able to talk a little bit ahead of time, crack a few jokes, knowing a little bit about the person, finding obscure areas that maybe they might have shown an interest in on social media and just say, oh, I saw you're over at blah, blah, blah. Bang, they're talking, right?
Yeah.
So, and maybe that never makes it into the podcast, but that's just a pre-roll that you're talking about.
Okay.
So those sort of things kind of help a lot. And, you know, being able, if a person starts getting really kind of, you ask a question or you bring something up and you can tell by their reaction that they're uncomfortable, I've gotten more comfortable saying, you look uncomfortable when I ask that question, right? Is there a reason why? Or should we talk about something else? And just throwing it right out there. And quite often that diffuses everything. They might say, yes, I'm really uncomfortable about this because, and they got this whole story and, or maybe, no, it's important, I should tell it, or whatever it might be. And I found it easier just to call it out. And just being able to talk on things is helpful. If you can start filling that air a little bit because you're the constant. And even telling the person, just saying, look at, you know, I'm hoping for a little bit more than a yes or no answer to this. I mean, you're the expert in this. Is there a reason why you're not elaborating? Are you nervous? Right? Let's talk about being nervous. And I just try and throw it right out on the table. And I find the audience will appreciate that. And if it's something that maybe it's not something that I'd want out in the world because it might be embarrassing for the guest, then I'll just edit that out.
Okay. Cool. Probably the last question I had on guests here, and I think it's going to be particularly relevant to me. So thank you. We, like I mentioned just a moment ago, we're all over the place. So I would envision most of our guests being all over the place. And you mentioned earlier too, you had that one instance where there was a glitch in the thing. Do you use any special resources or to schedule folks, especially? I mean, you and I, we're what, 9 hours apart? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't see that as a particular challenge. Just because we have to do so many conversations with so many people and often have to coordinate, people that are on opposite sides of the world with us in the middle. But, as in the podcasting world, maybe for people who don't live in that world, who don't, deal with, time zones that are 18 hours away, what would be useful, from your perspective in scheduling that sort of thing?
Well, there's a lot of scheduling apps out there. Like anything, they can fail. There can be issues. They tend to generally be pretty good. What I do is I use the Riverside scheduler that goes out because when I've used Squadcast, I've used Riverside. I'll talk about the differences and why and what I've chosen, where I'm at when we talk about Kit. But I now always follow up with a text message or an email giving the time in 24 hours and given the time zone as well. And then if I'm really feeling ambitious, I'll calculate what that is in their time zone. But given the human error part of that, all of that, I'll say just 100% confirming you got the link. We're on this day. I give the month, the day of the week, right? All of these things at this time, Pacific time. GMT -7, which is where we're at right now. And I throw all of that out there. And now the onus is on them to ensure that they look at it.
Yeah, they're a fully functioning adult and can check the clock.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and I do that, and it's saved my bacon a few times when scheduling apps have messed up. And if there is an issue, at least you can turn around and say, hey, not a problem, right? I'm not going to rub it in their face, but I know I'm not the one that's wearing it, even though I'm affected by it. They're going to be the one who, they're not going to be upset with me for making that mistake is the best way to put it.
Well, personally, I appreciated the email. I saw it first thing this morning, and I was walking. Oh, dear God, I can't type and walk at the same time. And I was trying to do that, and almost ran into traffic. It's not a good thing.
And I do try to email ahead of time as well, just to confirm, because if I'm going to get up early or I'm going to head into the studio, I just want to make sure I'm not wasting my time if it can be put somewhere else. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah. There you go. You got it for resources and checklists. I've got how to interview, actively listen. So I do a lot of watching a person's facial expressions.
Okay.
And I'll watch your body language, and I'll see areas that seem to ignite curiosity. If they're telling a story and they get particularly emotional about certain parts, I got a pen and paper with me, and I'm always writing things down so I don't interrupt them. Not everybody needs that. I find I think better if I'm able to write things down. There you go. Some people, everyone's got their own little style, but I've got a pen and paper for the guest, or pencil and paper for myself. And what that also tells them is if I'm talking, that they can write down their stuff and not interrupt, right? Because I don't listen to a ton of podcasts. I have heard some where people are just shouting over top of each other. I don't need that. I'd rather listen to a conversation, and having that pencil and paper I find helpful. Eliciting information. I sometimes listen to what's not being said. If there's parts of the story that, and it's an interesting story and it gets glossed over, and I'm going to pick on poor Colin here, Colin Deller, one of my early podcast guests. He fought off a grizzly bear well in the grizzly bear's jaws using his cheap folding buck knife that his father had bought him from a Canadian Tire store. Massive injuries. But I was on a different wavelength. I was on a different energy level. I flew in. I'm sitting in his house. He's talking about everything but the bear attack, which is what I'm like, I want to hear all about this bear attack. And I wasn't picking up on the fact that he's got severe PTSD from the incident, and his verbal is nonverbal, and he's mentally avoiding the incident. And finally, I just said, look at Colin. And there's a lot that was edited out of that podcast. And in hindsight, I shouldn't have edited that stuff out. Tearful breakdowns, very emotional. I said, Colin, let's just go get a coffee. We don't have to do this, right?
Yeah.
I came in with a different energy level, and I feel people said that they don't notice it, but if I listen to that episode, I feel like it's noticeable. So the faster I can get on my guest wavelength and energy level, I find the better it is to be able to have a proper communication with them.
Well, to that effect, it's something personally that I struggle with, the active listening. Because I've got the solicitation requirements, and I'm talking to the client. Okay, they don't have this. They don't have this. They need to say this. They need to say that. And so I'm listening for the things that I want to hear, and I've struggled with that and tried to change a lot recently. What do you do to, like you said, to get yourself on the guest wavelength and really actively listen? Probably
the number one easiest tip out of all of it is to say back what they just said, to repeat what they just said. Because people want not just to be heard, but they want to feel that they've been heard, right? And so simple things. So what I'm hearing from you is, and I just say these things back, and it gives them the opportunity to correct it. And it gives them the opportunity to say, yeah. And then they drop that one piece of the puzzle. And so you can move on to the next one. What I'm hearing from you is you feel passionately about A, B, and C, right? Totally. Well, that makes a lot of sense, because what I'm looking at doing over here, and how do we move that into, and so that from an active listening standpoint is not just like sitting there and being quiet and waiting for them to finish saying what they're saying. I'll take notes of the different key points that they say. I'll repeat those key points back to them. And so that okay, yes, I've been heard. And I find that has been probably the number one most helpful thing to progressing a conversation along.
Cool. Thanks.
And to speak comfortably and confidently. This will go to a question, and I should probably, I was going to leave them to the end, but we had a question about Helen. She asks, how do you know, there it is, how are you confident in your content that people will want to listen?
Wow.
And that's, I thought that was a really good question from Helen.
Yeah.
I think it's not so much that you have to be super duper confident that you are the expert in everything that you are about to talk about, but you're the expert in you, and you can ask questions from your perspective, as silly as they may be, because other people will be thinking it. Isn't that Joe Rogan's success?
Yeah,
He's a smart dude who can ask the dumb questions and right, and come across like the dumb guy, but he's not dumb.
Yeah, exactly.
So how are you confident in your content that other people will want to listen? Be confident in the fact that you're interested in the subject and you're passionate about these different things. Even if that passion is just the connection with the individual, that will allow the content to come out in a very real way. I had I think it was Jimmy Carr, the comedian out of the UK, and he was asked a hypothetical for his kid. And they said, well, if your kid wanted to be a magician or some other job, like what would you tell him? And he's like, oh, of course, follow your dreams, do what you want, but look at what the market has to bear as well. You got to be realistic about it, because if the market doesn't bear it, don't worry about it. And I was listening to this with my daughter, and I looked at her and I said, what do you think about that? And my daughter is she's turning 17. She's like, no, I think that's wrong. I think the person should do what they're passionate about. And I said, well, how come? And we talk about this for a little bit. There's an individual, like if the market says she wants to be a doctor, and let's say the market says you got to be a doctor, and this is going to be where all the money is and all the rest. But if your heart's not in it, all right, you're a doctor, but what kind of a life are you leaving, right? Or leading? And if you're not happy with what you do, it's going to show in your work. You're not going to have the practice that you hope to be able to have. It's it's a difficult way to live. Have you heard of a guy named Francis Bourgeois?
I think so. Remind me.
Okay. Well, there's a guy named Francis Bourgeois. He really likes trains. And he sticks this goofy GoPro on his head that makes his head look like his eyes like out, his super narrow chin. And man, this guy just loves trains. He loves hearing the trains. What does he call it? A thrashing, when they let their the engine go by, or they blast their whistle. That's his thing. And he'll run beside the train and have this goofy little laugh. Like, that's what he's passionate about. Is there a market for people who like trains? I'd say no. He's got over 2.5 million people who follow him on social media.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Because they enjoy his passion.
Yes.
Right? So that's how are you confident people will listen to it? If you're passionate about it, people will listen to it. And that's it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And part of me also, my immediate thought when you read the question was, everybody doesn't need to listen to me. Everybody might not want to listen to me. And I'm good with that. I want to get to the people who I can help, who want to learn what they can from me and that sort of thing. So I guess maybe that's just a different way of saying it. That look, it's not about me or the numbers or the audience or any of that mess, but I know what I'm doing here, and I think I can help other folks. And so listen, if you think it's fun and I can do it in an entertaining way, that's awesome. I don't know that I'm going to be running down the side of the train tracks, with an RFP in my hand. But if somebody does,
but if you have that kind of confidence, if you have that kind of ability to just understand that it is that pursuit of your own enjoyment and passion that will attract other people, the faster people realize that. And I still have troubles with it. I think everybody will have troubles with it, but the faster you can just jump into that, holy crow, the world's your oyster. All of a sudden, everything's going to start opening up, because the people will be like, man, I want to be on Stuart's podcast, because he just loves what he does, right? And I want to love what I do, and he can help ignite that passion back in me. I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. Yeah,
it was a great question.
Helen, thank you. And there was another question, and I'll just it was actually asked by. You know what? I'll leave it to the end. We'll come back to that one. Let's talk about gear. I've got under gear, I made categories of studio, travel, and remote podcasting, and I'd call this remote podcasting. So
Okay.
I've broken it down into a few different categories. Right now I'm in the studio, but we're doing this remotely. Sometimes I might travel to a location. I bring all my kit with me. So I'll try and make that differentiation as we go through your questions here.
Okay. Well, just in general, and that was one of the first things that caught my eye and my ear was, again, the general production of your studio podcast. And personally, and maybe this wouldn't be relevant to everybody, but I would imagine there might be at least a segment of the population that does want to portray the studio image. So how'd you get there? What goes into everything I'm looking at behind you there?
Okay, so studio image for video studio image, lighting. Lighting is going to be your number one thing that people have to concern themselves with. More than what's the best camera or what's the best lens. Lighting, 1,000% will make a world of a difference. If you're using your iPhone to film yourself, but you're properly lit, amazing. It's fantastic. And there's people that do that. So lighting would be the number one thing, and I'll talk about that. And for the audio, your number one thing is going to be the treatment in your room.
Okay.
Not what's the best mic, what's the best recording program, all of that is garbage unless you have properly treated your room. So those are the two biggest things that I would look at. I'm going to talk about what that looks like. When for the studio that we're in right now, I went into my lumber pile and I just chopped up some wood and I tried an epoxy finish on it and I just cut a tabletop. And I mean, it's not.
I mean, it looks designed, man. It's very well done, honestly. I mean, if you told me you just went out in the garage and threw it together, I'd call you a liar.
Well, the legs, I went to a local pub, Four Winds, right beside my studio here, has got these custom welded legs on their thing. And I thought I could do that. So I just cut up some metal and welded it up and gave it a paint. It looks kind of cool, but it's not something that's going to be like the most functional if you had it in. Like Four Winds, even their ones, they got screwed into the wall, which these ones aren't, so they're a little wobbly. But room is 12 feet by 14 feet is what I have here.
Okay.
I wanted to have if I had more distance, that'd be fantastic, because that can give me a better depth of field, which means I'm in focus and my background is blurry, right? And that gives sort of a more cinematic look. You'll notice there's lighting in behind me. I got little pot lights. This used to be my office, my main office, and then I'm in my office studio. A friend came by and he's like, everyone's got to be a media company. I've been watching Gary Vaynerchuk and he says everybody should be a media company. Trav, you got a voice for podcasting, right? And I think that means I don't have a face for But so I moved the staff all from here. I said, I'm going to try this, and got another location closer to my home, 10-minute walk away. This is a 10-minute drive. And I started plugging away and making what I have here. I started by getting the microphones. I just Googled what does Joe Rogan use, right? He seems to have a popular podcast.
Yeah.
I got these Shure SM7B microphones.
Okay.
These are dynamic microphones. So you're going to find condenser mics and dynamic mics. Your Yeti Blues and Yeti Snowballs, and they're a popular microphone. They're going to be a condenser mic. And the way I think about this, when I was a kid, I used to make room bugs. The goal was to make a room bug for about $8 or less, because when you put it in, you don't want to have to go back and bring it out again, right? So when the battery's dead, you can leave it. They would be these little things you solder together, and I would have a tiny little condenser microphone on it. That condenser microphone would pick up all of the audio in the entire room. Great from a room bug perspective.
Yeah.
Not great if you don't have good sound treatment in your room, because it's all going to echo back to you. Not awesome if you have a guest in the room with you talking, because both of the mics will pick it up. So these dynamic microphones, Shure SM7B, it uses an XLR output on it, or newer, they make the Shure, I think it's called the MV7, and it's both, it's cheaper, You can plug your USB straight into it and into your phone or into your computer. You don't need an audio interface in between. It's supposed to give you the same audio quality as this. I don't have the ear to be able to differentiate, but the pros say it's great. You can buy the thing on Amazon for a lot less, but they're dynamic mics. Okay. Personally, I would lean towards a dynamic mic if you're going to be doing podcasting. My next door neighbor, my new one that just purchased a unit beside me, his business is literally reclaiming old dirty golf balls and throwing them in giant washing machines and washing them. You can't hear him. And the machines are running right now based on the sound treatment and the dynamic mics.
He's got golf balls going in washing machines right next door.
Yeah, giant washing machines and running these things through.
God. Okay.
So
that's crazy, man.
Yeah. Hanging things on your walls if you don't have sound panels. So I went to a place, Prima Acoustic, they make sound panels.
Okay.
Ceiling sound panels, drop ceiling that come down here. I got sound panels all over the walls. Each one makes a little bit of a difference. It wasn't that night and day that I was hoping for. And then I got some Roxol sound insulation. It's like, it's designed to go in between drywall and in construction. And I had windows all on the inside here that face out into the rest of the office, and I shoved them full of this Roxol. That made a huge difference.
Wow.
So it's just a fiberglass, and it was cheaper.
So I feel relatively confident that I could do that myself. Mm-hmm. Do you need to be an engineer? Do you need to be a general contractor to be able to put this sort of stuff up?
No, not at all. I mean, I did a little bit of measuring because I wanted everything to look neat and tidy and all my sound panels to be spaced in a way that was aesthetically pleasing. And so it took me some time to put it up. I didn't have to. Like other people, they just put them all together and they throw them up. Knowing your hard surfaces, like if you have a hard table, which I do, and you're getting bounce back, throwing a soft mat over top helps. Sound blankets they help a lot. They might not be aesthetically pleasing, but if you're doing audio, they're great. The guy I was talking to yesterday, he just picked up a microphone. He says, previously, I would go in my closet and I'd record all my audio in there because it sounded fantastic. And I've done it. I've actually had a sound blanket over my head, talking into a microphone in the hottest day of summer, sweating my very, very hot. And, but the audio sounded fantastic, right?
Hey.
So, cameras. So I started out just with audio. Shure SM7B microphones. I was using Yeti mic boom arms.
Okay.
Because they're not cheap, but they were a bit more affordable and they were well rated. I tried a few different types. I got a bunch of these Yeti ones. There's really no good boom arm out until I found these ones, which are the OC White & Co. Ultima Pro mic arms. So OC White Co. They're expensive, but man, they work awesome.
Well, first of all, it hadn't moved an inch, a millimeter since
No, I can move it and it stays wherever I want. And,
exactly. And I don't hear it at all. There's no sound coming off of that.
Yeah. So those mic arms.
Okay.
Cameras. I kind of went cheap the first time through, and they're not cheap, but they're a little cheaper. But I went with Blackmagic cameras because they're supposed to give nice cinema quality camera and look great. What they lacked was autofocus, which is an important thing if somebody's going to move and you've got a very shallow depth of field, because all of a sudden they move and now they're out of focus. Yeah. And the other thing I had a hard time, if you look at the earlier episodes of the Silvercore podcast when we went to video, the color is off. And I wanted to streamline things. So I've got Canon cameras in here now. Okay. Canon's got dual pixel autofocus, which is fantastic. It's pretty darn good. And its color science means I just set it and forget it. I don't do any color grading. I would spend so much time before trying to color grade these things, and it still came out looking anemic. Now these things, they work well. So I've got 3 C70s set up inside the studio now, but nice. I went with those cinema cameras because the DSLRs had a recording length on it. I believe they've removed the recording length. The new Canon mirrorless R6 Mark II, I believe, has no recording length. They can be used as a camera as well, as a video camera. They can be used as a sort of a stills camera. They probably have a better resale because they're newer and a larger market, and they're a lot cheaper.
We've talked to lots of folks, and everybody from I got it all thrown together for $100 to I've spent tens of thousands of dollars on a camera, much less the 6 that I now have. One of the most interesting things that we came across, somebody had repurposed old drones and just stuck the drones on basically just tripods of stands, and was controlling them somehow from a board. And so they still had a little bit of movement, camera movement.
Oh wow!
And the pictures were phenomenal.
Yeah, 4K footage out of the drones.
Yeah, exactly. And that's if you're going to recycle, might as well.
So I should probably give a caveat. When I'm talking about what my setup here is, I'll explain it from tip to tail, but you don't need this. I did this because I wanted something that looked good, and I wanted it as turnkey as possible. I wanted to come in, press record, stop, leave, and be able to print that as fast as I can without color grading, without all these other things. So that's been my effort, because if I get bogged down in the post-production, it's going to make wanting to do the podcast less desirable, and it will kill the flow. Friend of mine, Kelsey, so she was recently in the UK on Piers Morgan's show. She's got a podcast called Brass and Unity. Just did a podcast with Jordan Peterson. She's been on... You're laughing. Why are you laughing?
Yeah, because I know that podcast.
Okay, there you go. She's got she's with Jordan Peterson. She's been on Jocko Willnick. She's been on Lex Friedman. She doesn't have cameras yet. She has been able to do all of this sort of stuff. She's in the process. I think she's looking at the Canon R6 Mark II, but she's made it a fantastic job with her podcast all over the world, high-level people. I think Theo Vaughn might be coming on here shortly. You don't need to have the world's best audio equipment, the world's best video equipment. What you need to have is a passion and the ability to share that. You can get really good quality with your phone, and if you get a microphone like that MV7, you're going to be ahead of the majority of people out there.
Yeah.
So
I'm talking to you on a $20 microphone I got on Amazon 2 days ago.
And it sounds fantastic.
From the handful of tests that we did before, I was like, that's not bad. I could record voiceovers with that.
Lenses I used, I went for speedier lenses, but I didn't break the bank. I don't need L series lenses. Okay. I think they're 50 mil. I think it goes into 1.2 on the for the aperture. Of course, the smaller the number aperture for people listening. I know you know this. The bigger the aperture expands, which means lets more light in. That's why they call it speedier, because you get more light faster. Yep. But it also gives you a greater depth of field, which means blurrier background and that sort of cinematic look.
Yeah. And that's what I appreciated. And I really appreciated your comments too about, listen, I don't have the time or inclination or desire, passion to be a post-production specialist.
Totally.
Yeah. And I could totally understand where a lot of people starting don't have the budget for that, as well, either in time or, actual money. So yeah, the ability to, like you said, come in, sit down, have a conversation, and then boom, I've got a publishable product that appeals to me considerably. I would imagine there's a significant, there's at least a segment, listening that's what I want.
Well, if I was doing this on the absolute budget, I'd be recording on my phone.
Really?
Like really, our modern phones are fantastic. And you can record two people at the same time. If you put it far away, put it on a bit of a tripod, you can run your audio straight into it. Rode makes the ability to record multi-track into your phone with a little device that can plug in, and you've got each microphone goes into one's left ear, one's right ear, right? Recording multi-track for people listening simply means you're on your track, I'm on my track. If I want to make edits afterwards, it's really easy. My first podcast I ever did, I recorded here, was all single track. Everybody's voice was myself, was Nick, it was Paul. Sorry, I was just blanking there for a second. And
Dear
Paul, when he was not talking, you could hear him breathing. And I'm like, I want to edit out the breathing. And I couldn't because it was all on one track. If it's multi-track, I can take that out. So if you're doing a podcast, record multi-track.
Okay.
That would be my
Pro tip.
my tip, 100%, because it makes editing easier. You can take out background noises. If you had a fan running the entire time I'm talking, I can just shut that off.
Nice.
Right? So lights, I used Aperture lights, Aperture Amarans. I've got a couple mini domes, one that points at my face, one that points at the guest's face, and then I've got, I think they call it the lantern right above me, which is why I now wear a hat every episode so it doesn't reflect back off of my bald head. And all of this runs into I've got a Universal Audio Apollo X8. And it goes through a cloud lifter because it brings these dynamic mics. I can do it without the cloud lifter, but I Googled it.
I don't know what a cloud lifter is, man.
Cloud lifter basically increases the gain, so it increases the volume that comes through without increasing all the background noise.
Okay.
Goes into the Apollo, and then I've got a little, everyone's got their own separate headsets that they wear. It's important to wear these headsets because then it lets the person speaking know if they're getting far away from the mic and they can hear it in their ears, or if they're too close, or if they're peaking. That's what the headsets are there for. I set a gate on my audio, meaning if it's too quiet, the audio doesn't really pick up. And you'll hear it if you listen to my first podcast I did with Seb Lavoie. Ex-head of BC's ERT for the RCMP, and he was talking quiet, and he kept moving back and forth on the microphone, and you hear this clicking low, clicking high, clicking low, clicking high. The easy fix I should have done was turn the gain up on the computer just a little bit to adjust for that, but I was sweating, I was learning all this new stuff, but I set this gate specifically so that if he's talking on his mic, it doesn't pick up on my mic. Yeah. And if I'm talking on mine, it doesn't pick up on his. And that way it makes edits easier. And then for the video, it all goes through a ATEM ISO Extreme. What is it called? ATEM Mini Pro. ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. I got stickers on top of it I put on. Little stickers with arrows that remind me to turn on the recording and turn on different buttons. That is all wired in. I use Amazon, just a remote switch, so I can walk into my studio. Nice. I click all on, everything bang comes on, lights, cameras, everything, and all I got to do is remember to press record audio on my thing here, click record, and then I got a Mac beside me over here, which is capturing or recording into Audition. Okay. So I went and figured out how to use Premiere Pro, After Effects, Adobe Audition, Lightroom, Photoshop to at least a workable degree by watching YouTube videos. Yep. And the pro tip on that one is if you're using Audition, because it can be pricey and it's subscription-based, is purchase it on a Black Friday sale because you get it for half price or more. Or if you purchase it before, cancel it on Black Friday and then purchase it again. They're okay with it. They're used to it. And then every year when it comes up for renewal, it's always renewing on Black Friday. So nice. That would be the pro. Yes.
We just got hit with that. The Creative Suite just bumped up from, we had a 170% increase.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Well, I better look at it again. So Black Friday helped. Yeah. Prior to that, I'm a school, so I would do the educational discount, but Black Friday was better.
Yeah, we had the educational discount. It should still. And it's my son's account. Ours, we just had Acrobat on, but he does all the creative cloud stuff. and it went from $19 to $35. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Well,
So
the lights
not quite as bad as I just said. So it's like 70% as opposed to 170.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So the lights I used, I specifically chose because they were affordable, they were well reviewed. These are the Aperture Amarans, and they can be used battery powered. And I've recorded out in the field, just plugging into batteries. I just went to Lauren Lapham is the place here in the Lower Mainland, Vancouver, Burnaby area, and they supply the film industry with a bunch of stuff. So I just talked with them, and they set me up with some long-lasting batteries that.
Wow.
Yeah, so
like, that's phone charging batteries, on steroids.
Oh, yeah, they're the big brick things, yes. Then I have arms, these little arms that the cameras are on, and I got them off of Amazon, and they are good call. I haven't written down here somewhere. Oh, Canon C70s are on the Manfrotto MHX Pro BHQ2 ball heads. So I put them all on ball heads.
Yeah.
And I've
had
just
two Manfrotto tripods for 25 years.
They last forever.
Great stuff, yeah.
And then newer is NEWER, triangle wall mount boom arms, because they work. They didn't break the bank. They're set up. I just screwed them into the wall, and I can adjust the cameras where I want. And it keeps... Rather than worrying about somebody tripping over a tripod or something, I wanted everything mounted off the walls or the ceiling so that it's clear and clean inside here.
Okay. Do you, when you're getting set up, I would suppose maybe you've got a screen, maybe you're looking at your Mac, and got somebody adjusting manually?
No, I don't have somebody doing any adjusting for me, but I've got, I'll do the adjusting. So right now I'm talking to you. I've got a computer monitor that I can see. I put the ATEM onto preview mode. Otherwise I'll get that sort of picture in picture kind of when you put two mirrors together.
Yep.
So it's on preview mode. Then I've got a monitor above it, and it's got a breakdown of all my different cameras and stats, and it shows my recording length. Right now, I'm using Riverside because we're doing it remotely. It's doing all the recording for me. Okay. I'm not recording on the hard drives. If you're using a hard drive, I found the Samsung T7s, and I think now it's the T9, so Samsung T9s, solid state, couple terabyte hard drives. I went and picked up a bunch of those. They work. They're really quick. They've been really robust. That's what I lean on. Sometimes the cameras, one camera I just got to put a new battery in it because for whatever reason it doesn't charge when it's turned off and plugged in. That would be one downfall that I see to this model. It'll lose the settings. So I have to set my camera, remember that these cameras, their native video ISO is going to be 800, and I set my depth of field to 2.2 for the aperture. 5600 for my Kelvin, and I set my lights accordingly. Then I don't have to deal with anything afterwards.
Okay.
On the audio quality as I'm recording, 4800 kilohertz. I guess you got 44100 and 48100.
Yep.
I just started using 4800 for everything because then I find my audio actually matches up with my video. Okay. If I do, let's say, this recording, and on Riverside, it's something you actively have to select before you get in. I want to change it from 44100 to 48. Otherwise, over a long period, you'll get audio drift.
Really?
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about editing. The cameras are run on long, they're D-Tech fiber optic HDMI cables.
Okay.
They charge you a bit more. I see they've come down in price significantly, but they were like couple $100 for each 25-foot cable.
Yeah.
I think they're like $50 now.
Yeah.
But you need that fiber optic if it's going to be run over a distance.
Yeah. Okay. When because you talk about they're battery powered and whatnot, and you can take them with you. Do you dismantle the studio and go to the field, or do you have a different kit?
So, yeah, good question. So that was the studio we talked about. If I'm going out on the road, I have a different set of lights, so I don't have to take the lights down. I'm not breaking the bank and purchasing these. I'm not buying RE lights, and which are fantastic. They're great, but these are LED lights. Are they going to be more shock resistant? And I've got accounts with Pelican as well as Nanook, and they make Nanook's the Canadian one. They make protective cases.
Yeah, love that
And I'll
stuff.
fly. Yeah, so I'll fly with those. The cameras, I will take the cameras off because these are cinema cameras. I've got 3 in here. I'm not going to buy another 2 cinema cameras just for the occasional ones that I go for. So I'll take the cameras off and I'll fly with them. The lenses, like I say, I think I got them on eBay. You only have to spend a couple $100 on lenses. And in fact, if you go for the older Canon lenses and just buy the $120 adapter because it's EF lenses and the new ones are RF, I think is what they call them.
Okay.
So you get the little adapter that goes over. You can buy cheaper lenses with the adapter. You're golden. You really don't need state-of-the-art for that.
Nice.
One thing I did notice, so my lights travel with separate set. Cameras I'll take off. Microphones, I'm like, well, one of my first away ones I did was in a jet boat outside a historic ghost town on the side of a river, right? So my wife was doing some spay fishing for steelhead while I sit in the boat with the jet boat operator, and we're talking about, so kind of an interesting location. I don't have a table to set up these microphones, so I picked up some handheld microphones and some nice quality ones. Sure, I believe they were. A nice full set. I had visions of us all sitting around a campfire and long cables and people talking. And here's the thing I learned. People will do this. And if you're just listening and watching, I'm gripping the microphone on and off of my hand, and that picks up all through. They will look at me and they'll hold their hand in the same place, or they'll look to the side. Like their microphone discipline is nowhere, right? Because they're not used to it. So my lesson I learned was Audio-Technica makes a headset. I did a podcast with a company, Vortex Optics, and they've got their own podcast, and that's all they use is these Audio-Technica headsets. The BPHS2 is what I'm using, and it's got a boom arm that comes out. And once you adjust it, doesn't matter where you look, you've got the right distance. You got your headsets all in one. Sound quality is fantastic. They travel easy. So that's what I use for my travel kit.
Okay.
Cool. Audio-Technica,
I wouldn't even thought about that. The headset with the boom, obviously, but you see that all the time. My partner was just invited to speak at a local organization, and it was just a table kind of format, and they just passed the microphones around, and half the folks you couldn't hear. And,
right.
And, every time she got excited, the microphone's still right here.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And when I first started, I was going overkill, and I had shotgun mics in here for backup audio pointed at the people. I would lav mic up. And I found, the lav wasn't really the way to go for me. DJI makes some pretty cool lav mics you can clip on. Yeah. You can record multi-track as well with those. Rode, they're known for their kits and accessories. I know a lot of people are really happy with them as well. Those are can be easier ways just to kind of get into it.
Okay.
They'll pick up a lot more external audio though.
Yeah.
Let's see what else of my stuff here. I think that covers most of the kit that I'm using in the studio here.
Okay.
So then we got the Away kit, which those headsets were the big eye opener for me. They helped a lot. Oh, right. And I record into a device. So rather than bringing my computer with me, because I've tried that before, it can be a little difficult to record multi-track into a computer without having an audio interface in between.
Okay.
So I picked up an audio interface, which is a little box you pick up and you plug your mics and everything into, and it goes into your computer. And it was a Scarlett, I think it was the type that it had. And that one now just sits in a dedicated kit that I'll ship off to people if they don't have proper mics and stuff. I've got a little Pelican case, Pelican Air. I think the last guy that I did one that needed it was ex-Navy SEAL Andrew Arabito. He's got a company called Half Face Blades. You'll see him. He's wearing the kit and using the stuff in there.
Cool.
Right, but the really cool piece of equipment that I think people will like, just a basic recorder. Yes, you can record into your phone, but if you're getting a little more into it, Zoom makes recorders that they're pricey, but they're not like sound devices, which is a brand name, which is like pro quality $3,000 to $7,000 for these recorders. This one you're looking at like $500 for a Zoom recorder.
Like
I tried
Zoom,
a few different
the video conferencing folks.
No, same name, but just
Okay.
I'm pretty
All
sure
right.
it's different. But the Zoom F6 is the one that I'm using right now.
Okay.
And the reason I'm using that one is because it can record in what's called 32-bit float. Don't ask me the specifics about 32-bit float. I had a guy in here yesterday. He's recording audio for a video game, Apex Legends, I think it's called, and he needed sounds of different guns, magazines going in and out, slides getting racked back and forth, and so we're recording that. He had the expensive sound devices, but he was explaining this 32-bit float to me, and my understanding essentially is, and it's proven to work this way, if you scream into your microphone and it peaks, you've lost that audio. If you talk really quiet into your microphone and you try and raise that volume up, you're also going to be raising all the extra ambient noise or the floor level, or I think they call it.
Yeah.
With this 32-bit float, you can scream into it and then you can pull it back down and you haven't lost it. You can talk real quiet, you can bring it back up, and you can do so with very little background noise and everything else being introduced into it. So from my
32-bit
background,
float. Okay.
not being an audio engineer, because part of it is you have to set your recording levels, and if you got a really quiet talker and you didn't set your levels right, you've now lost it. Or if you've got a really loud talker and they've peaked through everything, it's blown out. Now I just make sure I get it around it's negative 12 decibels is their average when they're talking. And if they scream and laugh, or if they talk real quiet, I can recover it. So that would be the pro tip, 32-bit float.
Okay.
The Zoom F6 is the one I'm using on that one.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I guess the last one would be the remote podcasting that we're doing right now. So Squadcast I used for a while. I ended up having a couple issues with them. Great platform, great service, really love them, great customer service, but there's a couple that I lost my recordings. So I made the switch to Riverside. I had one glitch up with Riverside, but only just the one, and I'm not certain if this was user error or what. So I've been using Riverside since.
Okay.
Riverside will record multi-track, so your audio will be on a different thing. If you do Zoom, you're all on the same track.
Yeah.
If you do Zoom and the connection gets poor, and you know how sometimes a person starts stuttering and they disappear for a bit. Yeah. That all goes into your audio. That all goes into your video. What I like about these dedicated podcasting apps is everything that I'm recording now is being recorded locally on my computer. Likewise, everything you're recording is being recorded locally on yours. So if we have that stutter time, as long as we can manage our way through it, the end result won't have it in there.
Wow.
The caveat is you have to tell your guest to keep their computer on while it's uploading when you're done. If they have a strong internet connection like you do, we're simultaneously uploading.
Yeah.
If you have a weak internet connection, then you might actually have to turn that simultaneous uploading off just to hold a conversation.
Wow.
I had a conversation with a fellow, and every 30 seconds I got 2 words. And I just said, "You're a good talker. Let's just see what we can do with this." And you would never know it by the end result. His connection was so poor that we just weren't getting anything.
Wow.
But so
yeah, so
Riverside.
that's what I'm looking at over here. It keeps saying 99% uploading.
Mm-hmm.
So we're
You've got good internet.
yeah.
He had max speed was 5 megs up, was his maximum highest speed he got. And I think we're at like 2, 1.5 at some points.
Yeah, I went and complained several months ago because I was only getting 1.6 of my 2 gigs that I was paying for.
Yeah, well, at one point, this office, I had to pay for several different copper lines coming in. So one would run our IP phones, one would run a couple computers, one for And then they would bonded copper coming in. When they finally came out with fiber, I'm like, oh, thank God. And so that's the one thing with doing the remote podcasting. You need the bandwidth.
Yeah.
You need your individual to test their bandwidth ahead of time. And the recording equipment, they might have the best recording equipment. An individual, he was a host of, I think it was Deadliest Warrior on History Channel, Jeffrey Thor Demelin.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, this is going to be fantastic. He's going to have this all audio video stuff figured out. And he used a pair of wired Apple sort of iPhone headset, which isn't the end of the world if you're not letting the microphone rustle against your shirt. But he was in a room with nothing on the walls, no pictures, nothing. Ooh. And he had so much reverb. And that took a long time for me to try and fix and post. And I hope
we're set up okay over here, man.
You're good. You're sounding awesome. Okay. Does that cover all the tech questions?
Well, one thing, you just kind of lightly touched on it earlier. Software. I mean, anything other than, because you'd mentioned Adobe's Audition. You had mentioned the Apple software, which name escapes me at the moment.
GarageBand?
Yeah. No, the other one that you said you pipe everything into your Mac, or you had at one point. Maybe
so
go ahead. So talk to me about software.
Yeah, for software, I went with Audition under the Adobe suite simply because I was learning the video through Premiere and everything kind of works together.
Yeah.
Back in the day, everybody was using Pro Tools. That was the main audio editing platform for the real professionals out there, so I'm told. It's expensive, but it was a one-time buy sort of thing. I don't know if it still is. Adobe is a little bit easier, but you're in a subscription and they're always charging it every year, and people didn't like that. People are starting to get used to these subscription models. The pro tip, the guy recording the audio for Apex Legends in the studio here yesterday gave me, he says Reaper is one. It's Reaper, and it's the one he's using, and he's a professional audio engineer, and he says it's free. He later texted me, he says, well, it's free if you keep clicking the button. Otherwise, it's $60 to remove having to click the button when you log on. So whatever button that he's talking about there is, as a pro engineer, I take it he's still using it for free, and it's been working just fine for him. He said it's renowned for being one of the most highly customizable audio editing platforms out there. If you click a button and you want it to do something and it doesn't, you can make it do what you want to do, is what he says.
Wow.
So Reaper would be the one that kind of gets people going. Other than that, GarageBand people can record on for the easier ones. We'll talk about editing in a little bit, but yeah, the one that I use is Audition, and I use that because the Universal Audio plugins that I purchase, I work with the Apollo, and at home I've got another Shure SM7B mic set up, and I've got an Apollo Twin X, a smaller version of what I have in case I need to do any home recordings or touch-ups or whatever. So I've got
okay. So it's pretty universal, and I mean it's Adobe. It pretty much plays with everything, I would imagine.
Yeah, and you can get on YouTube and you'd be like, I want to learn this, and there's going to be some wizard out there who can show you how to do that real quickly, and that's how I've learned how to use these things.
Yeah, honest to God, if you needed to learn how to sew a cat into your couch, you could find a YouTube video about that.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess that kind of brings us into software and recording.
Okay.
So I've got you've got a whole tab on software and recording. I've got only notes.
So we kind of talked about you use Audition. I don't know that. I mean, are there any special pieces of software that you use specifically for the recording, or for while you're capturing the audio before it goes into post?
Yes. So my goal is to be able to record the best quality audio right off the hop, as opposed to trying to fix it all in post. If I can get something that's 90% of the way there, 95% of the way there, and I just tweak a little bit at the end, that's for me. So that's why I went with the Canon cameras, because their color looked awesome. The autofocus worked. So with the Adobe software, I record it, it goes in, and I've picked up, I'm going to pull it up here, and it's some Unison analog vision channel strip is what I use. I actually had an audio engineer come on in and, oops. Are you there? Oh,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah, I'm still
Okay,
here.
well,
I could hear you the whole time.
149. Okay, I'll make an edit there. 149. I had an audio engineer come in and help me out and set everything up.
Wow.
And he says, pick up this and train me, essentially, because I was only getting so much off of YouTube. So I'm going to share what he's provided to me. And he says, if you're recording in your microphone, try and get your EQ and your levels where they want for your voice, right? So a little bit of that's trial and error. A little bit of that is just Googling what's a good EQ settings for a male voice or for a female voice, right?
Gotcha.
And I'll take care of that ahead of time. You want to have your volume level, the gain set. He says, with these microphones, you make a fist, and that's a distance away that your face should be from your microphone. So it's pretty close.
Yeah.
He set a gate up on it. So that gate is what I explained earlier, which will basically pick up when you're loud enough in there. And we know now we can adjust our gain or the gate if we have a quiet talker, so we can avoid that clipping. But these little settings on the EQ, all of a sudden, instead of your microphone picking up everything, they're picking up your voice and kind of what you want to hear. Okay. So that was the biggest tips he provided. And let's see if I can see here. Low pass filter and a high pass filter. So you just make settings on those, and the gate. That's essentially it.
So, talk to me a little bit more. I mean, it's kind of a nuts and bolts kind of question. So, the audio from your mic, it's going into this device, and then going into Riverside, and then going into Audition.
Right. So, if I'm in the studio, the audio from my mic goes into the Apollo, and from the Apollo into my computer. Okay. Right. So my Apollo is acting as my audio interface.
Okay. And at your audio interface is where you set the equalizer settings.
That's right.
And the gates and the gain and all of that.
Yes, you can set it on there, or you can do it through a program on the computer, and it's software defined or software based. Same thing for this that we're doing right now. And if I was on scene somewhere else, I'd bypass all of that, and I'm just going straight into the Zoom recorder. Okay. And then I'm applying those same settings afterwards. So it's just one extra little step.
Okay.
So one thing that I've noticed, which is kind of cool, that I've been able to do with my podcasts that others, not everyone does. So there's a very popular podcast by Stephen Bartlett called Diary of a CEO. And as I listen to it, there's one thing that he could do in his audio that I think would help. And I always wonder why he doesn't do this, but he gets plosives in there. So sibilance would be if you have S's and it sounds whistly or high and scratchy, they call that sibilance. A plosive is like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, the boom of air going in. And I just run a basic effect in Audition called Kill the Mic Boom, or Kill the Mic Rumble, and it kills all of the plosives throughout the entire track. And then anyone coughing or plosiving into it, it'll get rid of it. So when I bring it into Audition, I get my levels about the same. So I want to find your average volume that you're at and bring it to about -12 decibels. I'll do the same to mine, -12 decibels on mine. And then I go down to my effects rack underneath, and I will add what I'm running on mine is 610 version B for presence and warmth. It's a plugin. It gives you round vocals. I leave it on the stock setting. I also run oxide tape for a low-end bump. I leave that on the stock setting. I run a precision de-esser, and the setting I put at master fader on that one, and then the other one's called precision limiter, and I set it to K to 12 broadcast. That's at the bottom. It applies to both tracks. On both of our tracks individually, I'll run the FFT filter for kill the mic rumble. And if the Sibilance is still there, I'll put an individual de-esser on it. So that's sort of I go on those things, and then really the long part, that I just take my audio, it records into Audition, it saves on a file in the cloud. I go home, I got my other Universal Audio there. I pull up Audition, all the audio's there, everything's set up because I made a template, and I set our volume levels and apply the effects, and I export each track individually.
Okay.
As a WAV file.
And for folks who never use the Adobe products or not, maybe not an audio product like Audition, everything you're talking about sounds very technical, but it's literally just, it's an option that you select, just like you would select bold in Word.
That's right. Yeah, and if you Google those things that I said, you can just pull it up and and YouTube will show you how to put it in your master rack at the bottom and your effects. Like, it all sounds technical, but those are 4 things at the bottom that I have running. The FFT filter on the track, and I could probably apply it on the master as well, but it's just how I've been doing it. But that said, a friend of mine, April Vokey, she's got a very popular podcast. She's one of the world's top anglers, spaycasters, steelheaders, fly fishers, and her podcast is called Anchored, and she doesn't do any of that stuff. She just does all of her audio editing in Premiere Pro, and she'll just click on through there. And now Premiere Pro has more enhanced audio tools, and you can just click the track and you can say, is this background noise? Is this vocals, right?
Wow.
You just click vocals and you say, what do you want it to sound like? Podcast voice is one of the settings. I mean, and that's what she does. So when I first started editing these podcasts, I was super self-conscious, and every or or whatever I would take out. One guy I recorded a few podcasts with, he's a 7-time national service rifle champion, and he was talking about mental marksmanship. But he had a little thing when he talked, he'd go, just this little tisk every time before he said something. There's maybe just how his mouth is shaped or how it opened up. And I'd go through and I'd look for that line and I'd edit it out. Cut all the way through. Look like a fish in the waveform pattern. I'd edit all of those out.
Wow.
You know what I do now?
Push a button.
Nothing.
Don't even worry about it.
Nothing at all. I worked on my and having a more natural podcast where people don't feel like they have to recall specifics and details. They can talk from their heart and from their memory. Those tend to disappear.
Interesting. And honestly, sounds like a lot less work.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So,
okay. We talked about Riverside. That covers, the remotes. You talked about the Samsung hard drives would be
yes.
your choice for storage. We talked about plugins and add-ons. I think you got it all, man.
Well, there's a couple of things. 4K video. Cameras can film in 4K video. It's a bit of a bear to work with unless you got one of the newer computers. But honestly, the majority, I'm going to film in 1080p, and I will upscale to 4K in Premiere Pro when I export it. And that way, when I upload to YouTube, it shows up as a 4K video, and it still looks fantastic. And they say they're slightly better looking. And, there's dispute back in the day. Apparently, YouTube will prioritize 4K and possibly in the future 8K videos because they want people to have the best viewing experience, right?
Hey,
but I'll work it at 1080.
I think about that, and I think about when I'm not sitting here and I don't have fantastic internet, which most people, I would imagine, half their day at least, they're not in the best internet connection mode. Pulling down 4K video it's not what YouTube is feeding you.
No. Yeah. But that gives people the ability to pull down lower versions, but it'll suggest that as a higher quality video.
Yeah. Okay. Have you found personally that has that had any impact on views or algorithm or?
No, I haven't. People debate about it, and I'll defer to the experts. But what affects views the best is going to be your thumbnail and your title. 100%. If you have a catchy thumbnail, if I throw in SAS Special Forces, right, people will click on it, they'll watch it, they'll listen to it, even if the guy talks about something, he says, oh yeah, I did Special Forces selection, it was great, but let me talk to you about something else I'm interested in.
I love to knit.
That's right. And that's it, right? And you'll get people watching it. And from that perspective, and that'll bleed into, you've got planning and workflow and hosting and publishing. We can talk more about that in the hosting and publishing.
Okay.
What do we have?
Well, why don't we jump into the planning? That's going to be important for us.
Okay.
Just because, again, I mean, we're under constant deadline all the time, and you're a minute late, your bid doesn't get looked at. So, and there's no getting around it. The ultimate sin in our line of work is lateness.
Okay.
So, talk to me about your planning methodology a little bit. Is it, do you got the next 6 months of what you're going to post, or do you kind of, storyboarded, or is it, hey, this sounds cool, let's do this next week?
Yes and no, and both. So, oftentimes there's going to be, hey, that sounds cool, let's do it. When are you available? Great, let's run. Done is better than perfect. So many people get caught up in wanting to make it perfect. And I was a victim of this as well. How can I have the best quality video, the best quality audio? How do I edit all of these little things out? Only to find it sitting on the computer and not getting uploaded. And consistency is more important than perfection. So you want to be able to have something, if you have a favorite show that you want to watch and it comes out every Thursday.
And it's late, I want to rail at somebody. Yeah.
That's right. Or let's say it comes out on Thursday this week, and next week it's Friday, and the week after that it's not, and it's not on for a month, and then it's on again. I mean, people have pretty short attention spans, right? So they will quickly find something else to get into. So consistently publishing an episode at a rate that you're able to record quality at is sort of what I'm looking at. I've done once a week when the pandemic hit, and I was recording once a week for the podcast. I found that a little difficult, the workflow that I was doing, so I went to every 2 weeks. I find every 2 weeks is a very manageable way to live your life, record podcasts, stack a couple up in the flow. If you haven't done any in a while, you'll be able to pick one up. And if you're running a hybrid model, I mean, you can always run into doing a solo podcast where you talk about a couple things and thank everybody for listening and encourage them to share with others if they're finding value. I mean, there's always little things you can do to kind of buffer yourself. I haven't had to do the solo yet. I did record a couple with my wife. I did one with my wife as our 100th episode. And nice. I specifically chose her because, I mean, of all the support she provides, she's really knowledgeable in her background. But I did not wish to devalue all of the past guests that I've had by trying to pull in a ringer for my 100th episode, because really everybody's a ringer. Everyone's got some great value. So scheduling.
Do you batch record and then just schedule in advance for uploading? Or is it, like you said, you're talking about consistency, he's consistently uploading, but do you do that hand in hand with consistently recording and producing?
Sometimes I've found myself working episode to episode and not having anything in between because my other work and life and everything else kind of comes in between. So that's why I've done it for every 2 weeks, because it allows me to be able to have a meaningful conversation with somebody in a way that I feel that is bringing value to the audience without me feeling like I'm just trying to get noise on air. I will also at times batch record, and I've recorded a couple of podcasts in a day, I think is a max I've ever done. It can take a lot out of you. When you go in, you have to be on, and you should feel when you left like you gave it your all, and you should feel proud about what you've done. So that requires some studying ahead of time. If the person's an author, I'm going to read their book, Or I'm going to look at the back chapter and the front chapter and try and get the gist for it and read what other people have said about it. Or I will get the Audible version and listen to it as I can. Or I will go onto Fiverr and get somebody to transcribe it into a PDF and throw that through AI for the main tips. like these are the things that you do if you're on a time constraint and you want to show respect to the individual, but there's so much information that you have to kind of pull in. Word of warning, AI will lie to you. You know this, but for the listeners, AI can make up stats and footnote it and make up references in a very authoritative way. I did a podcast with a very famous Canadian personality, Jim Shockey. He's had a hunting program, and in the hunting world, he's pretty famous. And everyone's done an interview with him. I wanted mine to be unique and special. So I'm like, AI, find obscure stuff, scour the internet, find all this stuff. And it found, so Jim Shockey is an honorary colonel in, I think, a signal regiment over in on the island, which I know it to be a fact, and he is, and I've been able to cross-check it. But AI said that he was ex-Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, or PPCLI, right? And they gave some background there. So I'm talking to the podcast with him, and I'm like, so tell me about your time with the PPCLI. He's like, PP what? And I'm like, Princess Patricia, like, if you were PPCLI, you wouldn't say PP what, right?
Yeah.
And anyways, I had to backpedal on that one. AI will lie.
Oh, man. No, you got to be careful. And like you said, especially in this kind of instance, I was working up a meal plan. And had me eating 3 eggs every 2 days, something like that. I'm like, okay, so turn that into a shopping list for me. It came up with 48 eggs. And then I asked it, so how many eggs do I eat every other day? 3. And how long is the meal plan? 10 days. So, oh gosh, I'm sorry. And
yeah, you do have to watch it. AI is fantastic. If you use it properly.
Yes.
Fiverr is fantastic, but same sort of thing as AI.
Properly.
Right? You got to use it properly. And ethics can come into that, which we'll talk in a little bit. So I've actually talked to the authors ahead of time. I'll say, do you have this in a PDF format that you can provide to me, right? And so they'll say, yeah, don't share it with anybody. So that you better be damn sure you're not sharing it with anyone, because if you got one reputation, you mess that up, you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think for the planning of how I record them, I don't follow a super set plan. I have looked at trying to have other people assist with the planning, having staff assist with the planning. It's my podcast. It needs my personal touch. It's something I've learned, and I need to be able to talk to the people ahead of time, because some people, maybe they've got a great story, but it's not suited for a podcast, or maybe we do something a little bit different together.
Yeah. Okay. Is there an average in terms of recording session length? Do you try to keep the actual episodes kind of standard in length too? And do you need 4 hours of recording to get an hour worth of usable podcast?
So when I first started, I reached out to April because she had a popular podcast, still does, and she's like, 45 minutes. That's the time frame. That's what you should be looking at for your podcast based on everything she knows. And she's like in the top 0.5 or percentile of podcasts. Like, she's doing really good with hers. So I tried doing that, and I found I started trying to rush things to close. Or I'm spending a lot of time afterwards editing out, trying to find out superfluous stuff. And people consistently came up and said, Trav, I wish it was longer. I wish there was more time. I really enjoyed that episode. Now I just talk and I would let it run.
Wow.
And people seem to find more value in that. I believe this communication that we're having right now is something that is popular in the podcasting world because social media has made it less of a common reality. People don't meet face to face and have conversations in depth and in detail and go off on tangents in the same way that we used to. Yeah. Right. We get all the information fed to us so quick. YouTube, let me see the bar graph where people click the most. And so I can just go to that. Right. And we as humans require a certain level of connection with other humans. And I believe podcasting has been, and this is just my guess at thing, but podcasting is a bit of a proxy for that actual connection for people who may think that they don't have the time.
That's an interesting thought. It really is. I hadn't, that hadn't crossed my mind at all. That's interesting. Along those lines, so again, you just talk. So, we could have had a 15-minute conversation, or, we could go on for another 2 hours.
Sure.
Do you timestamp? Do you say, okay, this is where we talked about this is where we talked about that, so that if I need something, immediately as a listener, are you just waiting for do they need to be here for the whole experience, or do you help facilitate that? Or what do you recommend?
Two ways I timestamp. Number one, when we're having the podcast, I'll make notes at certain times. If there's an unusually long pause, which I will use as an interviewer, I will ask a question and I will shut my mouth, because people feel the need to fill dead air with sound. And that provides a person, and so many people feel uncomfortable with silence. So I'll use silence as a way to be able to elicit a response in an area that might not necessarily be the most comfortable if we're digging a little bit deeper. I can edit that silence out afterwards. So I'll make a note of that. Or if there's a coughing fit, or like earlier, when I looked down and I looked at my workflow and I thought maybe I lost you, maybe I leave that in so everyone can hear that, right? But normally I'd need a timestamp, I would edit that out. Afterwards, what I do is after I get my audio, I'll export it as a WAV format. WAV format will give you a better quality audio as I edit through different devices, because I get my audio first, and then of course we got video, and then I put that into Premiere Pro for the editing. I will take my final product out of Premiere Pro, I'll export it as a 4K video for YouTube, a 1080p video for, there's another company that likes to publish our episodes, but 4K is a bit high on the bandwidth, and an MP3, because all of your podcasts are going to be finally out as an MP3. Right. I'll take that MP3 and I'll plug it into a program called Descript. Descript will use AI to give a complete transcript. You can then name the people, so it's got your name and my name. It'll listen for it, and how many speakers. I'll say this is 2, right? And nice. Then after it does its thinking, it'll give a little clip and say, whose voice is this? And you type it in, right? Whose voice is that? Type it in, and then it labels everybody. I export a transcript of that episode, and I export the subtitles for that episode as an SRT file.
Yep.
My SRT file gets uploaded into YouTube, because then it makes it more able to recommend to people who, because YouTube will make its own transcripts, but one of the things that apparently is helpful for, let's say, people are hearing impaired or just want to read it instead, is have the SRT. Okay. So I upload that one to YouTube, and it'll have all the timestamps and everything in there. The transcript I put up on the blog, and it's got all the time frames on there, so someone can just go Command F or Control F, depending on their platform, and search for what they want. Apple has recently just started producing transcripts that go with the audio, so you can search within anybody's audio for specific points, and it takes you right to it. It's phenomenal. And on that note, Apple is going to be your number one place for podcast consumption, followed by Spotify. Okay. Everything else is going to be distant seconds, way distant. Apple is the giant. Spotify is a little bit smaller, but still for podcasts, pretty good there.
Okay.
So for timestamping, final thing I do is I'll take that transcript and I will save it. I just open it up as an RTF file, rich text, and I will save it as a PDF. And it auto saves into a cloud file, and I open up my phone. There's this app that I pay for called Poe, P-O-E, okay, which is just lazy man's AI. It goes on your phone, and I just go on my phone. I'm like, create a podcast description, right? And I highlight certain points, make it SEO optimized, whatever I wanted to do. If I don't like the description, Give me 5 more,
Yeah.
make it shorter, make it longer. And then at least it gives me a jumping off point, because I find after I've had the long conversation and then I'm doing the editing, I'm trying to remember back all of the things that we talked about, because guaranteed the best conversation is always going to be before and after you press record. After you press record, all of the cool stories come out, right? And so you might be thinking, oh, we talked about this cool story. No, we didn't. So I use that for the description as well as a podcast title. I've been playing with that to see what it can come up with. It'll be more likely to be clicked on in YouTube, and it seems to be working pretty well.
Okay, interesting.
The episode title.
So how long does all that take from start to finish when you got somebody, we plugged in, you hit record to the time you're watching it on YouTube?
Right. So if we're not counting download times, right, or transfer times, so when I'm done with this, I'll just make sure everything's uploaded. I'll go home. I'll download it on my computer. I just click download your WAV file, your raw WAV file, your raw video, my raw WAV file, my raw video. I walk away. However long that takes, 5 minutes, couple minutes, long, whatever it is. I come back, they're on the computer. I drag those WAV files into Audition. We talk about the effects that I put on there. I level them both to 12, throw on that limiter because that brings it back up to about -1, which is going to be a good volume for everything to go through. And that's the slow part of the process. Just because it's going through the universal audio machine and back for whatever reason, and maybe I'm doing something wrong, but I export it. It takes about an hour a track for the thing to export. So I just click export one track and I leave, and export the next track and I leave. And once I have those, I've got a template in Premiere Pro. Premiere Pro, I've got my intro and outro, which, by the way, I'm going to change my intro. It's too long. I had this little intro spiel that's the same thing over and over again. I got to imagine everybody probably fast forwards past that. I tell them about the club. I'm just going to have my signature sound file so that you are audio branding it so people can hear this. They're like, oh, I know what I'm getting into. And then just jump into the conversation. But I've dragged it into the template. I've got my template open. I'll open up one other Premiere Pro timeline. I drop my audio and my video inside there. I select it all and I click synchronize, because that was a question I think you had as well. I synchronize it all up. I trim the front and I trim the back. I drag it all to the beginning. And this is the #1 biggest time saver that I have ever encountered. I use an app called Autopod. And if you have multiple cameras, you have the ability to either have both of us up at the same time, but I prefer to have cuts in between the two. Yeah. Right. So I would spend hours making my cut, rewinding the playhead, making sure it looked good, making the cut, rewind the playhead. So for an hour podcast, I would spend 2, 3, 4 hours doing my cuts and making sure levels and there's no pops as it goes in between. And Autopod, I click go. It creates another timeline with a backup. And this one, it thinks for a second, and it took me 4 hours or so to go through an hour podcast. Is now done in 15 seconds. And you watch it go, bop, 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 as it goes through, making all of its cuts. And it does an awesome job. At some point, I'm sure they're going to get bought out, or comparable functionality is going to be native to the Adobe program or to Final Cut or whatever the person's using. But right now it's Autopod. And I hated that part of the process because it took so long, and it would be sunny outside or it'd be snowing or it'd be something. I don't want to be outside. And I'm sitting in here, I got to get through this. I hired other people. I hired Fiverr. I hired audio technical professionals. I hired video professionals. And I found a consistent thing to be true. Nobody is going to have the same care for your end result as you are going to have. Fiverr will apply a blanket template to everything, and they sounds good at the beginning and the end, but they miss the middle where everything's blown out. Yep. The person making the cuts is same sort of thing. The video pro is not going to have the ear for the audio. So I would highly encourage anybody listening to this, automate their process and find a way to be able to do these things until you're making a ton of money from it. Find a way to do it yourself because it'll cost a lot of money otherwise.
Yeah. Autopod, what's the subscription on that?
I forget. I think it's like $30 a year or something.
Ah, dear God. It's nothing, man. It's nothing.
I know. 4 hours or 4 hours of podcast are $30 a year, right? So that for me was an essential part of the process. So then I've got end result, MP3, 1080K video, 4K video. I upload the 4K video. I then make my podcast thumbnail, and I do that in Photoshop. That is something that maybe going to Fiverr would not be a bad idea because what you might think looks really awesome, that's one thing I found for making clips and for making thumbnails. Sometimes having somebody else's perspective that you think looks terrible can hit really awesome, right?
Okay.
Maybe I'm not the best judge of what's going to be awesome for it.
Yeah, I could see that. I certainly in myself, I could see that. I like what I like.
Right, right. And then when it comes to putting the podcast on YouTube, I got to say this. YouTube is not the place where people consume podcasts.
Yeah.
Just bar none. Long form discussion format, but it's a fantastic place. I'll throw it up there, but it's the smaller clips that will drive engagement over to the audio podcast, over to the website, over to different places. So you have to make sure you create micro content out of your podcast. And if you're able to do so in such a way that you can use your transcript and then keep up with whatever's trending, like let's say bear attacks are trending, then I'll just get I'll reuse a clip that I've made in the past with Colin Dowler and his bear attack, or I'll make a new clip based on whatever it is. So Google Trends, YouTube Trends, whatever might be there is a great way to be able to drive that. But we're kind of getting to a little bit different area there.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about in a bit.
Do you have any tools for that kind of those shorts, short form content?
Yes, Emily. So she is fantastic. She's been making short form content out of this stuff, and I would make it myself. Honestly, like you can tell the ones I've made, one she's made. Like we've got different styles. I've looked at stock footage to be able to supplement things. I've used Motion Array. What are the Artlist.io?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of AI tools that, like you said, you can feed it your transcript, you can feed it your tagline, your heading or whatnot, and it's supposed to. I haven't used any of them myself, but they're supposed to kick out a 30, 60-second snippet that fits the content.
So Riverside, the app we're using right now, actually does that now, and it'll create a bunch of snippets for you. I used it for the first time on my podcast I recorded yesterday. I was not happy with any of the snippets it made.
Okay.
Kelsey, Brass and Unity podcast, she's got an app that she uses that she says she loves. It's been fantastic. She referred it to me. I checked it out. It didn't do, I don't know, it didn't jazz me, but she says it's been working awesome. So I haven't gone and published what it's made. What I have heard from other people is to trust the AI. Even these terrible looking clips that you say are terrible will go out and start hitting super well. So maybe that's what she means by it's awesome.
Okay. All right. Trust our digital overlords. I understand.
Trust your digital overlords. I think that gets research.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the actual timeline of production afterwards, not including all the upload time and everything else that goes with it, I'm looking at about an hour to 2 hours because I'm creating thumbnails, maybe an hour. Like if I'm really kind of plugging into it, I could do all of this in half an hour without all the processing times. But I pick away at it is how I do it.
Okay. Now for the art, you mentioned Photoshop. I know a lot of people personally that are just afraid of Photoshop. I don't like it. It doesn't work like everything else. And personally, I use Canva for things that I
Canva.
can do much faster in Canva. Certainly doesn't have nearly the strength or the customization that the Photoshop does. But if I needed to kick out a thumbnail, I would imagine I could knock that out in like 15 minutes on Canva.
Honestly, use Canva. Canva's awesome. I don't know why I started using Photoshop. I think it's part of a challenge now because it intimidated me as well. I had to start trying to figure out how this thing worked. It allows me a little bit more flexibility with some stuff. Canva's amazing. Thumbnails. So I'll upload the MP3 to Podbean. That's the provider that I'm using. I chose Podbean because it was supposed to have the best metrics, even though they're not the most useful. Apparently podcast.
Was that Podbean as in Jack and the Beanstalk or Beam Me Up, Scott?
Yeah. Podbean as in like Bravo Echo Alpha November, like Jack and the Beanstalk.
Gotcha.
And it was priced right. A lot of pro tools that go with it. Does a lot of the posting and to third-party platforms for you. If you don't have your own website, it provides you with one. It does a lot. It's really well rated. Really, all it is an RSS feed aggregator and distributor. Talking about thumbnails, I used thumbnails because you have the ability with your podcast to upload a thumbnail for each episode.
Right.
I did that at the beginning, and all the science said don't bother because no one really shows those thumbnails. Now everybody shows the thumbnails, and all the science is saying I should be doing it. So I'm probably going to have to go back and pop these things up. So that's the other piece.
Don't eat eggs; they're bad for you. Oh no, eat more eggs;
right.
They're good for you. Yeah,
that's right. So Podbean's been good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see. We talked about planning. We talked about your post-production process. Yeah. We talked about how often. We talked about your workflow. Yeah, I think
streamlining. I see a couple points that you had there.
Well,
so
you talked about Autopod.
Yeah, that streamlined a lot.
Yeah. Okay. What else?
Well, there's one piece that I didn't talk about. So we talk about making templates, which is important. Recording best quality audio and video at the source. When we started this podcast, there was a countdown.
Yes.
Then you probably sat there like, how come he's not talking? The countdown's done. I'm specifically recording dead air. I probably should have told you that at the beginning. I record dead air at the beginning of my podcast so that if there is any background noise that's being picked up by your mic or my mic, that I can apply a print, a capture, and then a noise print across the whole thing to try and remove it.
Okay.
So that is one thing that's really helped. Rather than trying to fix it all the way through, that dead air at the beginning and the blanket print on there has been helpful for me.
Nice.
My intro, I've always viewed it as someone's coming into my house. I'm not going to say, go introduce yourself to everyone else. I'm going to say, this is my friend coming to my house. Here's their background. I've always viewed the podcast as requiring that sort of an intro. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. That's how I've always done it. But I've also found that that's one of the more difficult things for me is that intro will set the tone for the podcast and how it rolls through. So finding a way to get the main accolades to the person out of the way and their introduction and get it rolling has been one way that has helped streamline. So I'll type out my intro and I'll read it up a few times before I even get into it. So I have something that sounds like it flows and it's decent.
Okay. It worked well this time, I thought.
There you go. There you go.
In terms of, you're talking about reading. It just kind of spurred something. It's not necessarily on the topic at hand, but do you, because you mentioned you have screens, a couple screens right there in front of you. Do you ever teleprompt? Do you have your notes in front of you? Or are you just, because I see the notes you got in hard copy right there. Are you hard copy or digital in that regard? Mostly
hard copy. I will take my notes into a note on the Notes app within the iPhone. And that way I've got a backup if something happens and I can pull it up on the computer if I want. But if I've got to lean over to the side and play with the computer and I accidentally flick the wrong thing and it takes me away from the conversation, the only thing I ever put up is I'll throw pages up or a document file with my intro in big so I can read it on the screen across me, and I'll read my intro.
Okay.
That's the only thing I ever put up there. I have used a teleprompter for giving on the iPhone if you want to promote your app or promote your podcast or whatever it might be, and I don't want to do a billion takes and I want to get the main points out, I'll use a teleprompter app and I'll use that, but that's it.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, man.
Yeah. So what do we got next? We've got how do you publish it? So
Yeah.
we got YouTube, RSS, website, Podbean. Talked about that one.
Yeah. So one of the things that we were looking at, and I'm not sure if you have any direct experience. Sounds like you've got things in hand, and you had mentioned this one before, but we were looking at Kajabi. Just because it seemed to be kind of an all-in-one solution. They have a kind of a rudimentary Wix, Squarespace web development tool. It says you can host the podcast. They do landing pages and emails and marketing and like I said, kind of an all-in-one solution. The more we dug into it, it seems like it is an all-in-one solution, which means it's one size fits all. And being 6'7", one size fits all doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So,
well,
do you have any experience with? Are you feel you're better off with what you've got, or would you think maybe somebody just starting might be a good stepping off point?
I think there's a time and place for Kajabi. A friend of mine, ex-British Special Forces fellow, he had a situational awareness and personal protection website, then courses that he was hosting through Kajabi based on all of their accolades and everything else. And he's moved away from them. I think he's using Thinkific now as another platform. Here's my concern with any one of those things is who owns your data and what's your uptime look like, and what are the monthly fees and all the other things that go with it. So YouTube, obviously, they're a giant in the room. You're putting it over to YouTube. I've used
they own
Thinkific
10%
for other
of your soul right now. So just
I know. But it's for the audio, having your own like being able to publish all those audio files through an RSS feed and not having it all beholden to one place kind of appeals to me. If I wanted to make a move from, let's say, Podbean to Spotify or some other place, it's just the RSS feeds gets moved over. They've got YouTube instructions to show you how to do that. The only thing I'd look at is if you get into Kajabi and you don't like it in the future and you want to move it, how hard is that going to be? Yeah. If it's easy, fantastic, right? But if you have aspirations of doing things in-house or having your own things, I would look to that sooner as opposed to later.
Okay.
That would be my 2 bits on it.
I would tend to agree with you. The more we look into it, again, it seems like a great thing that does what it's supposed to do very effectively. I don't have anything against it. I just like I said, I think that exact point down the road, if I want to do something different, how modular is it? How plug and play is it? How easy is it to extract what I need and put it someplace else if everything is in their basket? And we've been distancing our decision making from that a little bit.
Another way to look at it as well could be they might have white label options, and you can just have your own domain and white label it through your own place, so you're still receiving all the traffic, or maybe even not white labeled. Who cares if it says Kajabi on it? But as long as you're able to still drive traffic to a place that you own, that would be my consideration as you move forward, because you want people to look at you and your professional company, and you never know what's going to go on with Kajabi, or they get bought out by the Alphabet company next week, and who knows, right?
Or they just go out of business. I mean, it happens. Yeah,
it happens. Yeah.
Okay, so talk to me about RSS feeds in general. I understand the basics. I know what we're talking about in general, but I've got to imagine there's a handful of folks out there that have RSS feeds. What are you talking about?
So that's basically just a something that comes in. I remember back in the day, you'd come into your Outlook in your mailbox and you see, oh, here's a new thing that came up. Here's a new announcement that you subscribe to these feeds. I don't even know. What does RSS stand for? Do you know?
I have no idea anymore. I did at one point, but
Okay.
yeah, it
Well,
does. It is an acronym for something.
yeah, and it's what feeds over the audio and your description and everything else to. Oh, I can see your face lighting up. You're Googling something.
Yeah.
So it's what's going to feed over the information to Apple and to Spotify. And so you want to pick a provider, and whoever you're going to pick, you're then going to want to set yourself up on all of these other people, iHeartRadio, or they'll have lists. You just Google, where should I be setting my RSS feed up with? And you just go through one by one and make sure that when it goes out, you're hitting the big ones, Apple and Spotify, and then the 50 or so other little guys out there. Because some people might just really be married to some obscure provider of podcasts and they want to see your podcast on there. And it's so simple.
Yeah. 1,000 years ago, I was very, very anti-Apple. I was not a fan of their customer service. And
Fair enough.
So now I had Microsoft phones. I had, and so I was an iHeartRadio guy for a long time. So there's people out there like that.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you just want to make sure your podcast gets out in front of other people's eyes. So take the time, Google all these other places you should be submitting it to, and go through the process. Sometimes you have to set up a proxy server. Like I'm in Canada, and I forget which one. I think it was Pandora said that they wouldn't allow anyone outside of the U.S. currently, and so press set up a proxy, and I can set it up there. Amazon Music, they're a big player, so better get your stuff in front of them. That would be my suggestion on the RSS, and then your provider. So I use Podbean. You just input your description, make sure you click what season you're on, and it'll episode number it for you, basic metadata, put any keywords in there that you think would be important, categories and tags, cover art. We're saying that's probably a bit more of a thing. Consistent naming is kind of nice. If people follow you, then they know if they missed episodes or not. So if you're an episodic sort of thing or some sort of a naming structure that is going to be consistent for people, put your links in. Make sure if I'm talking to you and we've talked about different things, throw those links, make it easy for people. If you've got a business and they want to learn about you, that goes in there. Your transcripts for SEO, explicit content warnings, they might ask you about that. So usually, like someone swears in your podcast, you don't have to all of a sudden put an R rating on it. They're looking for is the title, is the image explicit? Do you talk about explicit or political stuff that could be during an election time in the first couple of minutes of your podcast?
Yeah.
I've clicked always on YouTube, the content. I've as honest as I can. Every once in a while we had something gun related. So I'm like, and it's during election time. So I'll click it, and I've never had an issue with it. Most of the time people swear away, and we don't call it an explicit podcast.
Oh gosh.
And then feed validation. There's like Cast Feed Validator. He just takes a look. You can put your RSS feed in to validate everything's clicking properly on your podcast.
So Podbean, not Podbean. Yeah, Podbean. So you use them, and
I do.
And so it's got all of these options, like it's feed me your title, feed me your cover art, feed me all these different things, and then basically I imagine that it has connections to Apple, it has connections to Spotify, and so once you fed it the episode information, it essentially publishes it to the
That's
world.
right. And I think about leaving Podbean all the time because I want better metrics and better stats. I've not found a place that does it better. But yeah, they do a good job of getting your information out there.
Okay. All right. So what do you do to publicize? Do you publicize? Hey, I've got a new episode. Joe's going to be on it, and he's talking about guns, so it's not something you're going to see on YouTube. Better listen over here.
Yeah, I do. And here's a piece of advice I wish somebody told me when I started mine. If you're starting a brand new podcast, record a number of episodes without publishing them. 2, 3, 4, 5 episodes. Get a good number up, right? Gives you an opportunity to listen to them, and maybe episode 1 doesn't get aired, right? Maybe they're all gold and they're fantastic, whatever. But when you release them release them all at once. Get a good handful of them just thrown out there, because maybe somebody's really interested of episode 1, but no interest in 4, 5, 6 or whatever. Maybe they're really interested in episode 5, but not the first 4. You have a much better chance of being picked up on Apple's new and notable or different upcoming Spotify, whatever it might be. If you have 5 banged out all at once, people are clicking on them, downloading, listening, sharing. That would be one big piece of advice. If you can, that'll increase your odds of having some sort of initial virality or impact when you release.
Okay.
So that would be the one that I wish somebody let me know at the beginning. Aside from that, micro content, of course, is great. So Instagram, we do it through there. Facebook, YouTube, will run little ads. I honestly don't think we get a whole ton of response from any one of those. It will drive more engagement for our Instagram page. It'll drive more engagement for whatever platform that it's on, and maybe more followers there, which is fantastic. But actually affecting the podcast, not as much. I think people who listen to podcasts will be introduced to you through other people's podcasts. So be a guest. Go on other people's podcasts, provide insane value. Just think of whatever I can give them that'll provide them the best value. I know I'm going to put my air brackets up. You're a competitor in the industry. You've got a competing podcast. Don't look at it like that. Look at it like I am going to provide you 100% absolute best value, and you will reap the rewards from it, because nobody is competing with your podcast, because they can't compete with you. You are the individual behind it, and it's just as easy as that.
And you see that a lot with a lot of different podcasts. What's the guy? Everyday Spy. Okay. You know that one?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's on everybody's podcast for like 2 years. And then, he's got an instant following afterwards.
Yep.
How would you recommend to somebody, especially somebody in maybe a smaller niche? Who do you call? You just, hey, I saw your podcast. We talk about the same things. Can I be a guest?
Yeah. So the caveat there is, if you have a podcast, you start getting a name for yourself, people will approach you, and it's going to be either individuals, which I'll respond to, or sometimes it's going to be booking agents, and they just mass do it everywhere. And I usually don't respond to them unless it's clear that they've listened, they know their demographic, they know what's going on, and it's a personal sort of thing. And the person just happens to be so busy or such a big name that they have a booking agent. I've got a fellow, I'll be doing a podcast here in a couple of weeks, and that's the case. So if you're approaching another podcaster, they're going to be like, okay, what do you want from me? What are you going to try and leverage my audience for? What are you selling, right? So I think somebody like yourself is not going to have a problem. Yeah, I am selling this. This is what my background is, but that's not what the purpose of the podcast is. Yeah. Purpose of the podcast is for people to get to know me, and I have some specific information on ABC, which I think would be useful for your audience, and gain you more followers, gain you more exposure. That's the way I'd look at it. And then I'd actually deliver on that. I wouldn't go in there and be like, and make sure you check out my thing, blah, 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 right?
Yeah, like and subscribe. Yeah.
That's right. Because it's a small world. And if you can build their house up, it'll pay dividends. Like this, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know, and that applies everywhere. One thing that you put in your notes was sharecasts. I haven't found those to be the most beneficial, honestly. Where you and I record a podcast together and we share it and we put it out to the same episode to both of our audiences to introduce the other person. I think there's a lot more value into you just being on my podcast or I being on your podcast. Or if you and I are going to record one together, we put out different content We just say, look, why don't we talk for half an hour on my thing? We'll talk for half an hour on your thing, and then we'll put that out, right?
Okay. I could see that.
Yeah, because if you're doing it on YouTube will come up with a copyright infringement to the person who posted up second, right? And
Of course they will.
right, you want unique content for yourself.
And at the same time, too, again, I'm there on your podcast to try to provide something for your audience that might bring some of them to be in my audience. They've already heard it on your podcast. Why are they coming over to? Yeah.
I think you asked about ratings, asking people to rate it. I think having ratings on your podcast is a valuable tool. There is a podcast out there, Rookie Hunter Podcast. I've reached out to them a number of times because somehow, man, they had so many great ratings and they're doing such a fantastic job, and it keeps coming up over and over again, and they ranked really well. Well, what I think they did really well, number one, is they put a very clear descriptor of what their podcast is, right? I know what I'm getting into when I listen to this podcast. These are people who are new to hunting, and they're going to talk about hunting, right? So that's an important piece of the puzzle if you're doing a podcast, is name it well. Mine's the Silvercore podcast. That says absolutely nothing, but it provides me the latitude. If I don't want to talk about, let's say, hunting stuff, and I want to talk about AI or something else, it provides me latitude. I have an uphill battle that I fight in order to gain an audience based on the fact that I don't have a built-in audience off of the descriptor.
Okay.
I've reached out several different times and I've never got a response back, which may be the answer to my question. But I'm wondering if they paid for ratings to come on, because at the beginning of their podcast, like a Fiverr.com or one of these services, usually the most logic says, don't do that. It'll only hurt you, right? You want engagement. But on something like this, I don't know. Like, they didn't produce for a number of years, and it just kept coming up as being recommended and ranking high on the charts. Chartable is one of the places where you can look at these things.
Okay.
And I was just curious about it. I wouldn't get tied up into charts. I wouldn't get tied up into the listen notes. Where am I ranking now? Chartable, where am I ranking now? It's fun from a vanity standpoint. It's fun from a goal standpoint of where you're trying to go. But it doesn't really seem to mean a heck of a lot outside of that, unless you're talking to other people and saying, hey, look at how popular my podcast is. You should sponsor me, or you should those sort of areas I see value.
Okay.
Because, I mean, I'll go back to Kelsey's podcast. My podcast outranks hers on listen notes and oftentimes and Chartable and a number of different areas. I'm not on the Pierce Morgan show. I'm not talking with Jordan Peterson, right? So you be passionate about what you do. Give your all every time you do it, and you're going to find those rewards.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, paid advertising. I mean, just like anything in social media, I assume you, like you said, you can buy followers, you can buy ratings, you can buy likes. I would imagine that's a generally, like you said, generally a bad idea.
Generally, but if this, and I'm not saying it was, maybe they didn't, but there was a bunch of reviews on there that seemed inconsistent with what the topic in the show was about, which made me think that maybe they did.
Okay.
But hey, I mean, and maybe it was a time frame they did it in because they were around earlier and maybe it flew by then. My recommendation to people would be fly straight, do it right, and get people to refer you.
Yes,
get their recommendations.
Yeah, we actively reach out to clients. Hey, we just won you a $50 million contract. Would you pin us a wee testimonial? And they usually do. And usually I have to give them a little prompt. Hey, it was about this. We did that. You got this.
Do you remember?
Yeah. And
that's funny.
Do you find? I don't know. It's so trite now that it's almost just background noise, almost white noise. Like and subscribe.
That's why I'm editing my intro out, because it is background noise. I think there's a better way that you can do it. What people should be looking at, if I were them, is cultivating an email list with Klaviyo or wherever you're getting your emails, your distribution through, as opposed to trying to build an Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever social media, because you then control that. And it's something that you have. If you can build an email list and use that to be able to ask for things through or engage with people in your audience, I think that's going to be a more valuable way to promote it.
Okay. Do you find that you've had success, email in the audience?
Oh yeah, no, our email list is worth its weight in gold.
Okay.
Yeah. So both from a business standpoint, from a bringing in other people, because like if you're an interested party and you have business in where our email list demographic resides, that's a very, very big tool. You'll be on the podcast. You got over 100,000 people that are on the email list who are getting a newsletter with your information on it. I mean, it's a big piece of the puzzle, I'd say.
Okay. And we've thought about that personally as being, it's a more, and again, I shy away from this term a lot because it has so many negative connotations, but it seems like a more corporate way of approaching at least our client base. Because again, I see, I can see a proposal manager running into the chief BD officer's office and say, "Hey, look at this guy I found on YouTube or on not LinkedIn, on Instagram. They're going to win us the next $2 billion bid." There's a complete disconnect in my mind in that happening. And if I were the other guy, if I was the executive listening, that going, Mm-hmm. So I definitely see value in the email list and promoting and using that tool for that purpose.
And I haven't done this yet, but I have heard that you're able to use email lists to target through Meta. So that'd be Instagram and Facebook. So if you want to have targeted ads, but you vet it by the email list, it's another look at it. But essentially, you own it. It's your thing, and it's only going to grow. So start it now as opposed to a year from now.
Good tip.
Then I guess the last things we have here legal and ethical considera's.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of questions.
Yeah. I'd love to hear your viewpoint because it was very important for us. Again, we're creating branded artwork for proposals. There could be image right issues. And certainly, your solution for, making sure soldiers get food in Japan is probably fairly proprietary. So, what you can talk about, how you can talk about, how you get guests comfortable that, we're protecting them as much as we can. How do you do that?
So when I first started off, I used to have forms that people would sign, basically release of liability, indemnity, right? Just your image and your audio and everything's going to be used. And that became pretty cumbersome. I've never had an issue with this. I have been given the tip, actually it was April who says this, before you press record, she'll do some dead air and then she'll just have a little preamble while they're recording, just say, "You consent to this." And they'll catch all of that in the recording. "Yes, I consent." And she says, "Just let me know before it goes to air. If there's anything that needs to be edited out, I can take care of it, but it has to happen before it goes to air." So that's one way of just kind of getting the consent as a boilerplate. Yeah. I think a lawyer would have a heyday. The fact that you're sitting on the podcast and talking is an implied consent, right?
Yeah.
So you might not need these things, but from the copyright side, if you're using licensed music, you'll get copyright infringements on YouTube, like the intros. Epidemic Sound, Artlist.io, these different places. If I let the music I have at the beginning of mine, I'm going to make a new audio clip and it's going to be my own as opposed to licensing one.
Okay.
But right now it's licensed off of Epidemic Sound. If I let that lapse, all my old episodes are fine, but I put a new one up within hours, I'll get a copyright infringement. And any monetization that might happen off of that will now go over to Epidemic Sound, right? So these are things you have to look for. If you're using clips I had a guy, he invented the invisible cloak. So you're going to laugh, right? But this is Guy Kramer, and he brought it in and he showed it to me, and it was awesome. So basically, he took lenticular lens arrays with a viscous sort of compound in between it, two different proprietary ways, and it reflects light around an object, which will display the background, but not the thing directly behind it. Essentially, and you go on YouTube and you can see people who've now made his, because when I was doing the podcast, I broke his story. I was the first person. He keeps looking at his watch. I'm like, oh man, I'm doing a crappy job. Oh man, he's want to get out of here. And he's like, oh no, I'm sorry. It's my watch, Apple Watch, linked up with my phone. That was CNN. This is Fox News. Like, these are people trying to get a hold of him, right?
Wow.
And it was the most simple thing to make too. It's funny that what he's made. Google it. It's quantum stealth is what it is. Anyways, I use clips that had been on the news, and I got copyright infringements for these short little clips that are on there.
Wow.
So you can cover your button paper, but you're still going to get the AI overlords and the automated copyright infringements and everything else that comes on through. I'd say do your best to have your own unique content that's on there. That's a legal and ethical consideration would be copyright. Defamation. There's a reason why Joe Rogan says allegedly all the time, right? You have to be really careful. If you say something, if you have a strong opinion, or if your guest says something and has a strong opinion, and you have provided them a vehicle for them to defame another person, you could find yourself in a world of hurt, right? So have a good ear for that so you can correct them on the spot. You can have them wear it. You can edit it out, or you can provide some sort of a disclaimer. Trademarks, logos and trademarks and all this kind of stuff. Ask them, like we just did one with BC Wildfire Service. And so there's a big permission and asking of how everything goes through. Just make sure your butt's covered. Privacy, if they're talking about their own stuff, okay, I guess they're waiving their right to privacy. But if they're talking about somebody else's stuff, we have to be conscious that we're not violating someone else's privacy. If you're getting sponsorships or there's advertising, let's be clear about what you're getting out of this.
Yeah.
We're not misleading people, right? Because there are laws related to that. The contracts aren't a bad idea. I just got lazy, and I hope it doesn't bite me in the butt. So, in the release forms and all the rest.
Do you find, with the contracts that jurisdiction's an issue?
Could be, yeah. I mean, depending on where you're at, jurisdiction can always be an issue. But I made mine just pretty boilerplate. And I just left it as open-ended as possible. Yeah. I think the more technical you get with a contract, the more places a person can pick it apart.
Yeah.
And my views of contracts have always been, this isn't a piece of paper that allows me to take you to court when you violate it. This is a piece of paper that allows you and I to both understand what the rules are, so we never have to find ourselves in court. Yeah. That's always kind of been my view of them.
Yeah. And there are certain places in the world that if we're going to do business, we do so at risk. It doesn't matter.
Yes. Accuracy and honesty, respect for privacy we talked about, informed consent, make sure people are understand the context and the purpose of what you're doing the podcast for. You're not going to sandbag them. Don't bring them on in and you have a completely different agenda where you're going with it. Be fair about how you represent issues, right? And maybe that means bringing somebody else in with an opposing view.
Yeah.
But it will provide you a more authoritative approach to your podcasting if you're doing interviews, unless all you want is a one-sided echo chamber for your audience. Conflict of interest.
know, just thinking about, you know, my future podcast too. And we deal with government agencies on behalf of our clients all around the world. And I have very strong opinions about government agencies.
Yes.
So yeah, I definitely see, maybe I need, Billy, other side of the fence, who's always on every day.
Well, it's important, and that's one place where I have struggled, is I am rather reserved about some of my strong personal thoughts and opinions because I don't want to alienate other people. But if I'm the constant, they want to hear that. And there's nothing is going to drive engagement more than controversy or somebody espousing a strong opinion, right? Whatever your opinion is, prove me wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, you'll have people on there. So from a marketing standpoint, there could be a lot of value to that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But yeah, like you said, to make sure that you've got the legal wiggle words in there. You've got the, allegedly.
Allegedly,
yes,
yeah.
They're allegedly some of the worst things ever. Yes.
Yeah. So I have heard from, I don't know where.
I read it on the internet. Yes.
That's right. Yeah, and we talked about conflict of interest, transparency as well. Guest safety. I got a box of Kleenex here beside me, and I had a guest come in, and it's like, "What do you mean you've never had somebody cry in your podcast before?" I'm like, it's not that kind of podcast, but okay. I mean, maybe it's becoming that kind of a podcast, right? I want to delve deeper into different issues, into things, and it's a human podcast, so. If a person is struggling with PTSD and you want to take them down that road of tell me the war story again, right? Or whatever it might be. These are all legal and ethical considerations that somebody might want to have. Just because their story is really sensational and you want to get into the nuts and bolts, you're still dealing with a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, you could be talking, wins and losses and, successes and failures and, on both sides of the fence, somebody might be embarrassed to talk about, the great things that they've done. And certainly a lot of people are embarrassed to talk about the things that, they failed at doing. So, yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So you've got a tab here called Lessons Learned in Advice.
Yes. This was one of my favorites. And I actually added one more to the end of it. I'll wait to the end.
Oh, good for you. I like it.
So, we'll just start at the top here.
Yeah.
What are you said you've been doing this for what, about 5 years now?
That's right.
Okay. So 5 years. I mean, there's had to have been hurdles. What were some of the, 2-3 biggest things that almost put you out of that 1%?
Judging myself too harshly.
Okay.
I'd say that's it. We're all our own worst critic. And the reality is nobody else cares. Right. And the people that do care, they're not the people who are ahead of you typically. These are the people that are behind you trying to tear you down, right? Yeah. So being conscious of that, knowing that there's always going to be haters out there, but if you are genuine in your approach, I found there really aren't that many haters that kind of come across, and the audience tends to take care of them if anything ever comes up and there's an issue. Be honest, be fair in your approach, but the more controversial you're going to get, the more divisive opinions you'll have. And so that would be the number one thing, that the amount of effort I put into editing out every and ah, every dead space, every tick, as I say, which is going to get left in. Get over yourself. People don't care. What they care about is consistency, your effort, the quality of product. You look at Joe Rogan's first episode. Have you seen that?
Honestly, no. I've not seen his first episode.
Google Joe Rogan's. Anyone listening to this, Google Joe Rogan's first episode. He's got like bubbles floating around. He's stoned. It's like one camera. It's terrible. And if you Google him with Tom Green, so Tom Green is the one that.
Oh no, I did when he was on Tom Green's show like 1,000 years ago.
That's right. He's like, this is fantastic.
Yes.
Well, you could do so much with this. And he's getting all excited. And look what he's done with it, right? Done is better than perfect. So for me, the biggest obstacle was getting over myself. Another obstacle was thinking, I don't know how to do this. Like, I didn't know anything about Adobe when I started. I didn't know anything about audio and video or any of these things. Reach out to somebody else, ask for advice, go on YouTube. Don't try and sole source all the information from one place and have them spoon feed it to you. Treat it as a challenge that what I don't know now, I will know tomorrow. And the process in between is where the enjoyment comes in, where I'm actually acquiring information. So that would be my advice, where I think most people don't make it past the first couple episodes because of that.
Okay. Once you get past those first couple episodes and you know, you're in the thick of it, you made it over that 5 episode hurdle, you're trying to make it to that 20. Yeah. What keeps you going?
That's a good question. For me, what keeps me going is a connection. The connection that I have with the person that I'm talking with, and the fact that I'm always learning. One of my guests' Instagram handle, past guest, he's an author, written a book called Turning Feral, but his Instagram handle is Let Me Die Learning, right? And I thought, yeah, that's a pretty good one. That's what keeps me going, is the challenge, the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. The fact that I'm not there. If it was all on my plate right now, I'd be bored, to be honest. And the fact that there is a challenge aspect of having good audio, good video, then it's the micro content, then it's the engagement with the others, and then it's a following and the new connections that I can make through it. That, like, I'll be heading over in a couple of weeks. I'm invited to a lobster fest on the other side of the country. And then I was invited down to a fishing thing in Florida. I've been,
wow.
Like some Andrew Arabito, hey, you got to come hunting with me, right? Ex-Navy SEAL from Half-Faced Blades. Kyle Lamb, you and your wife have got to come down. We're going to go bow fishing off of my boat. Like, these sort of connections that you make with people just by being genuine is fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that is what keeps me going.
Okay. You've mentioned YouTube. You've mentioned that there's a lot of information out there. You got any specific resources that, hey, this guy's YouTube channel is awesome for learning X. Yeah, this was a book that I read on Y. Anything like that?
So Peter McKinnon's YouTube channel, years ago, 2016, 2017, around there, I learned a lot about photography and videography as he's learning his way through it and figuring things out, and basic editing in Premiere Pro. But the biggest thing that I think I got from that was his storytelling, the way he tells a story and the way he engages and his passion and for what he does. I think he's got about 5 million followers on there right now. So he's doing pretty good. That was one that was inspiring for me. Podcast Diary of a CEO is one that I've listened to. He's got some crummy ones. He's still got some great ones. He's a sharp guy. He can talk well. But that's in the way that he approaches the ask, I thought, for followers of subscribers, is short, sweet. I'm probably going to copy something that he does there and see how it plays out for mine.
Okay.
Aside from that, no. Prior to doing the podcast, I never listened to podcasts. I was a guest on one, which kind of got me going. And my wife got me a Christmas present to go see a live recording of a Meat Eater podcast. And I said, what's Meat Eater? Because I don't really watch TV. And why would I want to go watch one of their podcasts, right? A live recording of this thing. I don't listen to podcasts. And so anyways, ended up making some friends there at the podcast. I saw what it's all about. And I thought, I think there's a lot of good that can come from this. Those connections that you can make with others.
So what you can do with this.
That's right, totally. And then when my buddy had me on his podcast, I'm like, well, this is simple, right? It isn't. It is and it isn't. It's as difficult as you want to make it. Yeah. We just talked into a tape recorder and he pressed record and then play and put a little audio intro, and that was it. And it was I think it still is. It's out of all the episodes that he's run, I think it's the number 2 most popular episode that he's got, according to the rankings. And It wasn't because I did anything really special. I didn't have any great information, but just the fact that he's a buddy and we had a sort of, I guess, a connection and we were able to talk on there, I think is what really resonated.
Okay. We've talked quite a bit about, the why and making the connections. As your maybe your format or your content maybe shifts a little bit, how do you maintain that focus on what's most important as you evolve, like I said, the things that may change? How do you let those things change but keep that focus where it needs to be?
I guess there's two ways. Number one is you can keep your why large. And so a lot of different things can fall under it, which is what I've tried to do. It's going to be positive, my podcast. It's going to bring out the best in the audience and the guests is my attempt, or it's going to do that through either education or entertainment, right? And hopefully they're having a good time as they listen to it, or both, if you can get them both in there, right? That leaves it pretty open. So if I'm talking about international hostage recovery, or I'm talking about AI and with a guy in Dubai, or I'm talking about, ex-special forces folk, or the guy who invented the invisible cloak, or whatever. There's a very large blanket around there, and it's more about human storytelling than it is about, like my intro of my podcast, I think it says about hunting, fishing, outdoor community, the people and businesses that comprise a community. I'm going to change that because although those are some of my interests, I have a lot of other interests too. And really all I want to do is have a place where people can tune in and hopefully feel like they're better for listening at the end of the episode.
I like that.
That's it. The second way that you can adapt it is to narrow your focus. Like, for example, I gave the Rookie Hunter as an example. Let's say all of a sudden they want to talk about surfing. Are they going to put that on the Rookie Hunter podcast? No, just spin up a new one. It really isn't that tough. I was asked to speak for a university in California. I'll be speaking next Monday. Luckily, it's by Zoom. I thought I'd have to fly down for this one, but Doc C. Anyways, he's got like 12, I think, different podcasts that he's got going, all these different drug genres and ways. And he's talking about, I'll take podcasts that I haven't aired. If I want to go on vacation for a while, I'll take some of the earlier ones. I'll re-air them again because people probably haven't heard it if they just tuned into me. And so he's got all these different interests. And then he says, oh, this one's hitting my true crime one. And he's a psychologist. And so he'll look at criminal psychopathy and analyze like Jesse James and now this one over here is hitting, and then they'll just kind of amalgamate both of those into its own new thing. So he's got a completely different approach, right? Rather than keeping his why vague and having it all under one, he has a whole bunch of different podcasts that follow more direct areas.
Okay. That's interesting, man.
Yeah.
Is there one thing that you would have changed between where you started and where you're at?
Well, the one I mentioned before about recording multiple episodes at once prior to releasing, I'd have changed that.
Okay.
The second thing about my over-editing, I think that's part of the process, and I think that made me a better editor, and it also allowed me to be able to identify speech patterns that I had, which I needed to work on. So I would find myself practicing in general conversation with people how I might talk on the podcast and make sure that I want to be sharp. I want to be quick when I'm thinking about things. So diet plays a big role on that. I learned that one from one of my guests. He's a lawyer, and man, I don't know why I didn't think about it, but eating a bunch of junk food the night before or the morning of doesn't help. He says before he gets into a big case, he'll have like some sushi, protein, get a good night's sleep. And so all of these little things play a big piece of the puzzle, but nothing trumps talking about what you're passionate about. And never talk about things with authority that you don't have authority on. And I learned that one when I was being interviewed by CBC many years ago. I was in my early 20s, and they asked me a bunch of questions I knew all the answers to. And then they asked me a couple of questions that I had no clue on, and I felt like I'm on a roll and I've got to be able to provide. So that's where at the end of it, I'm like, man, I probably shouldn't have said those things. And the guy doing the interview says, we're not going to air those. Don't worry. I'm not going to sandbag you. But a little note, just because the camera's rolling and the mic's on doesn't necessarily mean you need to talk. So recognizing that in yourself is, I think, helpful.
Okay. Don't have to talk as long as the microphone's on. Gotcha. Like it. All right. So here's my big one. So for people like myself and other folks in the audience that have specifically tuned in to this particular episode because of the topic, 3 biggest things for people who are starting.
3 biggest things?
Yeah. What are your? I mean, I think I've got a decent idea, but I'm going to let you say it again.
Sure. Well, biggest things would be starting with the why. Because if you want it to be successful, you have to be able to understand what's going to drive you to want to edit those podcasts and maybe deal with nobody listening or maybe haters or whatever it might be. That why has to be strong for you, and you have to feel passionately about whatever it is you're talking about and understanding what your exit strategy also looks like, because you might not always be passionate about that same thing. So those things at the beginning that we talked about, maybe your podcast takes off and maybe you got sponsors and it's making a lot of money and maybe it's bringing you zero joy. So understanding ahead of time what your why is and what the exit strategy looks like, I think is a very important piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
So that would be the more nebulous big piece of advice that I give to people. Don't judge yourself too harshly. Everyone's going to make mistakes. And in fact, it's in those mistakes that people are attracted to you. Perfect isn't beautiful. It is something that my wife used to say to me. And now thinking about why would she say that? Perfect isn't beautiful. There's a popular, he's got a popular podcast, Mark Kenyon, and I was talking with him and he says, Trav, I knew the road to being popular on YouTube and social media, and I tried doing that. He's got a TV show on Meat Eater, and he's a hunting personality. He's like, yeah, you always show the hero shots and show you out there doing, you got the big animal, right? And you're always carrying a heavy pack, and he always successful. And I started down that path. And it got me a certain kind of a following, and I wasn't happy. And I found the second I started showing my mistakes and showing the problems that I was having and being honest about the process, his engagement took off, his audience took off, and he was happy because it's now him and he's not playing a role and he's not acting. Yeah. So those difficult points, I think, are important both in yourself as well as in your guests that you're talking to. Because in the early stages, and it's still something I struggle with, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. But if it's an important thing that we should be talking about, maybe I should be asking those difficult questions. Maybe I should be letting Colin Dell or break down and on the audio and explain everything, because that's going to connect at a much deeper level than how I edited it out to try and get the attack story in there.
Yeah.
So that would be the big broad ones, and then when it comes. That's 1 and 2 if I want to group them like that, even though I said way more. Number 3 would be don't get bogged down in the gear. Yeah. Make sure you've got good audio. People will forgive poor video. They're not going to forgive poor audio.
Yeah. Yeah, if I can't hear you, why am I here?
That's it. If it's poor video, they might think it's a artistic design that you're going retro, right? Yeah. It's who knows.
All right, man. Well, thank you. Honestly, this has been a wealth of information. I've got tons of notes. I can't wait to go back through them all.
That's fantastic. I think I got a couple of questions at the end here, and then we'll give it a wrap. Sure. I think I got to Helen's question. Third perspective podcast. How do you stay engaged with the guests and correct yourself if you realize you're not giving it your best? Yeah. So I wasn't properly engaged with Colin Deller when I flew in. I was all excited. I'm first flight out for a podcast, all the rest. And it's never too late to stop, regroup, and take a better course of action is something I've found. And sometimes I might even just have to talk to the guest and just say, you know what, let's start this again, right? Let's pick up from here going forward. I've messed up, whatever it might be. It's never too late to stop, regroup, and choose a better course of action. And your guests will appreciate it and your audience will appreciate it. So that's something that I've found. But the other thing is to make sure that I'm actually having that feeling that I'm engaging. I'm making eye contact with the individual. I feel like there's a connection, because if we're just both talking, I got to imagine it's not going to be a fun thing to listen to.
Yeah.
Helen, she asked someone about being confident in your content, that people will want to listen, and we talked about that one. Just talk. People will listen. It's just that simple. People will want to follow Francis Bourgeois because he's passionate about trains. And that's all there is to it. And the people who don't care about trains, or how about a guy with a goofy GoPro who makes his head looks like, I don't even know how to describe it. It looks like a pencil with eyes.
I got to call him and run next to a train with him one day.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
How cool would that be? Right? I mean, honestly, just to share that passion and joy with somebody else. I'm not interested in trains any more than the next person, really. Like, sure, the guests are cool, but how cool would it just be out there, run down the side of the walkway with them?
Yeah,
like,
really.
100%. Sabrina Smelko, I credit your help and suggestions to getting my podcast launched. Would love to know what microphone and stand you use. So, Shure SM7B with the OC White & Co. Ultimate Pro Arm. Also curious about your process for preparing for each episode before you hit record. So I will mentally prepare. I come in prior to each episode. I'll do, if it's something, sometimes I might feel nervous. Even if I've done a whole bunch, I'll feel nervous about getting into the podcast. I'll use breathing techniques, visualization techniques of visualizing a successful outcome and good engagement, and then rehearsing my intro. Those are the main ones that I'll do. Yeah, I
Good
mean,
stuff.
we're all humans. Jason Lovering, what was or still is the biggest time suck you learn to work around or mitigate? Autopod does all your cuts for video. John Maneri, how does the whole monetization thing work? Sponsors, do they approach you or do you initiate? You're going to initiate it first. Don't worry about metrics or numbers or anything like this. If you're bringing value to the audience, you can niche down as far as you want. If you want to have Nike sponsoring you, you might have to have all of those things. But if you want to have Bob's Comic Shop and you're talking about early episodes of Batman and everything else, yeah, not a problem. And bring them value. Don't look at money as your motivator. Bring the audience value and bring the end user value, more so than what you even feel like you're receiving. Because I don't know too many relationships where one side feels like, oh man, I'm sure getting a whole ton out of this, right? Usually the relationship is I'm getting what I paid for. So, nope.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Used to play that game a lot as a kid. And then I think that covers all of the questions that we have here. Excellent.
Well, thank
Stuart,
you. Well,
that was fun.
It was fun. I appreciate it, man.
And I hear Mario popping off in the background there.
Time to do something. I'm not sure what 8:30 is anymore.
Fair enough. Well, hopefully that gets some information across. If there's anything else you have questions on afterwards, let me know. I'll give you a copy of this so that you've got it for your side. And for anyone who's made it this far and listened from start to finish, if you have advice that you can give others, love to hear it. Things that have worked well for you. And if you have questions that weren't answered that you think should be, please let us know. Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, Travis. Appreciate it.